Hello, students. Good morning to all of you. A very good morning to all political science and international relations students. I'm very happy to inform all our students that the PSI paper, which was conducted yesterday, both PSI paper 1 and PSI paper 2 was based on predictable lines, and also our students who attended our lectures and were part of our class discussions and were able to access our notes, the notes material provided in the classes, and also the discussion which happened in the classes. All the questions in the examination in both PSR paper 1 and PSR paper 2, easily you could have attempted. Easily you could have attempted these questions. If you just have a cursory look at both PSR paper 1 and PSR paper 2, you would be able to realize that you will feel very confident. All the questions which were asked in the examination were based on our class discussions, were based on the materials which we circulated in the class, the notes which we gave to do. So I would say, if I do a brief analysis, I would say the paper was quite easy. Yes, of course, there were certain unpredictable questions in both the papers, one or two questions here and there, but largely majority of the questions were on predictable lines, and it was the level of the paper was quite easy. And I'm sure you would have been easily able to attempt this, and it is easily able to do justice to the examination. And also, students, I did see that the way the paper has been designed, there was a certain amount of focus on certain current trends, the current developments which are happening in world politics. The UPSC tried to frame questions taking a cue from the current trends. So that was also there. And therefore, reading of the newspaper and staying updated also is very important. Not just that you must be factually aware of whatever news is happening, but you must be aware about the trends which are happening in the world, the international politics, how politics of the world is changing. The questions, the themes of the questions were based on that. So that is also very important. And yes, like I told you, the overall nature of the examination, it was quite straightforward on predictable lines. And I am sure all our students would be very confident after seeing the paper, and they would be easily able to attempt all the questions in the examination with a lot of confidence. So in this video, students, I'm going to have a brief discussion with you on PSIR paper 2. I will discuss with you the questions which were asked in the PSIR paper 2, Political Science and International Relations paper 2, and I'll briefly tell you the nature of the questions which were asked, what approach you should have followed, and also what was the requirement of the question. It's very important to adhere to the requirement of the question and in what manner you could have proceeded with these questions. I will try and have a brief discussion on that. And first of all, students, PSR paper 2, I will start with the discussion on section B. As you know, your PSR paper 2 is divided into section A and section B. Section A has questions from comparative politics, international political theory, and concepts related to international politics, whereas section B has questions from India and the world. So I will begin the discussion from section B, and once we finish section B, then we can come back to section A and discuss questions also which were asked in section A. So first of all, students, I'll discuss short notes of section B, the questions which were asked in the short notes. So question number 5, section B. So let's discuss these short notes. So the first short note, students, was India must strive to become a semi-permanent member of the UN Security Council rather than a permanent member without the right to veto. You have been given a statement and you have to comment on this statement. And this question was for 10 marks. It is a short note. 150 words is the word limit. Students, this is a statement which we discuss in our classes. I even gave the name of the scholars who argue on these lines. For example, Professor C.S.R. Murthy. He believes strongly that getting a permanent membership in the Security Council with a veto is not a realistic possibility right now. Therefore, he has strongly recommended that India should go for a seat where India would be a member for more number of years, a semi-permanent status without a veto. So this is the viewpoint of various scholars have advocated this, have advised that this is what India should do. India should try and go for a semi-permanent status rather than a permanent status. So this is a question which is on India's demand to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. So this is a question which is related to the topic of UN reforms and also related to the topic of India's role in UN and India's demand to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. And in the classes, we discussed this, how India deserves to become a permanent member, what strategies India has been following to become a permanent member. And also this viewpoint has emerged in the debate and in the discourse that getting a permanent seat is not going to be very easy. Getting a permanent seat may be is not a realistic possibility right now, because In order to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council, what we will have to do? We'll have to do UN reforms. We'll have to amend the charter. And what is the procedure of the amendment of the charter? Procedure of amendment of the UN charter is mentioned in Article 108 of the UN charter, which says you need 3 conditions to be fulfilled to amend the charter. First is that 2/3 members should vote for the amendment. Second is 2/3 members should also ratify the amendment. Third condition is that consent of the permanent 5 members is also necessary. So you can understand, students, that getting the consent of China, which is a permanent member of the Security Council, to make India a permanent member is going to be very difficult. Yes, the other 4 permanent members have been supporting India's demand to become a permanent member, but getting consent from China may be very difficult and challenging. Therefore, becoming a permanent member does not appear to be a realistic possibility, and that is why a lot of scholars have recommended this. A lot of scholars have suggested that India should go for a semi-permanent status, a semi-permanent member, where we could be a member of the Security Council for example, 6 years, 8 years, more than the 2-year period, without a veto. So that is a realistic possibility which appears right now. Right now also, in a UN General Assembly session has been held recently in New York. A meeting of the L69 group of countries and the G77 group of countries was also held in New York recently on the issue of UN reforms. In fact, G4 ministers of the G4 countries also met in New York recently for UN reforms, and they've all reiterated at all these platforms, India has reiterated its demand that India wants to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. So this has always been in the news. It's a very important issue. On this question has been asked. So you've been given a statement and you're supposed to comment on this statement, 150 words. So students, in this particular question, you will start by writing how UN urgently needs reforms. UN Security Council need membership reforms and veto reforms. These reforms are urgently required. If not done, then UN is set to lose its relevance. You also can quote India's viewpoint. India has said this in the UN that a dysfunctional Security Council is a crisis of multilateralism. A dysfunctional Security Council represents crisis of multilateralism. And you must, highlight that in your introductory paragraph itself, that these reforms are urgently required. Then in the body of the answer, you must highlight, how India deserves to become a member. You may highlight the viewpoint of India's Prime Minister Modi, Dr. Jaishankar, how India being the most populous nation, how India being such a diverse nation, India's contribution to United Nations have been so significant. We have contributed 260,000 troops to UN peacekeeping operations. And therefore, students, India deserves a permanent membership in the UN Security Council. You also may write the views of certain experts who have argued. They've argued that if India is given membership, then legitimacy of the Security Council will also increase. Decisions taken in the Security Council will be considered more legitimate, more moral. The legitimacy of the Security Council will also increase if countries like India is given membership, which represents a vast amount of humanity, most populous country in the world, 5th largest economy of the world, great contribution to UN peacekeeping operations. So India is a nation which deserves a place there, and this will also enhance the legitimacy of Security Council and also enhance the capability of the Security Council to maintain international peace and security. So you can list all these points, but then you can also, as the statement suggests, getting a permanent membership is going to be very challenging because you need consent of all the permanent 5 members to amend the charter. And India so far has got support from the 4 permanent members, but China's position has been very ambivalent. China has been saying that if you want to reform the charter, if you want to do UN reforms, then widest possible consensus should be achieved. Widest possible democratic consultations should be done. That's China's latest stand. So therefore, China is often described as the guardian angel of the opposers. There is this debate, tussle between G4 countries and Coffee Club, uniting for the consensus group. So G4 versus the Coffee Club. You must highlight this debate in your answer and also highlight how it is so challenging for India to become a permanent member. Therefore, Professor CSR Murthy has also suggested for a semi-permanent status, India should go for a semi-permanent status, which appears to be a realistic possibility. Once India becomes a semi-permanent member, then in long term we can, expect more reforms in the Security Council. So that is how you can address the requirement of this particular question. In the concluding paragraph, you must end by writing that UN is suffering with a legitimacy crisis. UN is suffering a credibility crisis. UN has been losing relevance. It suffers from democratic and trust deficit. So it urgently requires these UN Security Council reforms. If these reforms are not done, then UN will lose relevance. UN will not be able to fulfill the responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. And you must give relevant examples. Recent failures of UN in the Ukraine war, recent failure of UN in Gaza, where a war is being fought between Israel and Hamas, where UN has not been able to prevent human rights violations, has not been able to prevent atrocities done on the civilians. So, which is a big question mark on United Nations. So, these reforms are urgently required, and India definitely supports these reforms, especially reforms of the Security Council. So, that is how you can attempt this particular short note, quite straightforward. And exactly the statement which has been asked in the question, this statement was discussed in our classes with you. We discussed this viewpoint in the classes with you, that this is what a lot of scholars argue and recommend, that India should go for a semi-permanent status rather than a permanent status, because that appears to be a more realistic possibility. Then the second question, students, the second short note is on Bhutan. Bhutan has been historically been an ally of India, no doubt about that. You know, India-Bhutan Friendship Treaty was signed way back in 1949. So historically, Bhutan and India have had a very cordial and a friendly relationship. But in the recent past, what has been happening? What is the recent trend? Recent trend is India, the rising tensions because of China. But the China-Bhutan border-related issues have become a security issue for India, and you have to discuss that. You have to discuss this. So again, a very straightforward question. In the introductory paragraph, go ahead, mentioning how India and Bhutan has been such a cordial, have been having such a cordial and a friendly relationship with each other. Describe the entire background, 1949 Friendship Treaty, which was reviewed in the year 2007 also. A friendly relationship, a relationship based on mutual trust, a relationship based on mutual understanding, how India has been helping in Bhutan's development, how India has been helping in Bhutan's hydroelectric power projects. Hydroelectric trade has been the economic bedrock of India-Bhutan friendship, how India has also been making investments in the new Jelfu city coming up in Bhutan. All these you must mention in your introductory paragraph, the good cordial relationship which we have always enjoyed with Bhutan. In fact, earlier, Bhutan was supposed to consult India before framing their foreign policy also. However, that changed in 2007 when the Friendship Treaty was reviewed. Then in the body of the answer, you talk about this Bhutan-China border disputes. Bhutan-China border disputes which have raised security concerns for India. So we've done this in the classes also. There are various territories, Bhutanese territories, which are disputed with China. China and Bhutan have territorial dispute, especially Doklam Plateau. Doklam Plateau is disputed. Then also there are valleys which are disputed in northern Bhutan, territory of northern Bhutan disputed with China, which we have discussed in the classes. And Doklam is very important for India. It is strategically located. It is strategically located on the tri-junction of India, Bhutan, and China, or in other words, Sikkim, Bhutan, and Tibet. And if China is able to grab this territory, then China would get access to India's chicken neck corridor. Our chicken neck corridor will become vulnerable to China's aggression, which will certainly have an impact on India's security. India's security would be jeopardized. Chicken neck corridor is India's only link between mainland India and Northeast India. Therefore, India would never want the Chinese to have control over this territory. This is the reason why a Doklam standoff also happened in the past. And also, this is the reason why India has always been concerned whenever Chinese, they have talks with Bhutanese to resolve their border disputes. Because, you know, China has been also making territorial swap offers to Bhutan. They want Bhutan to give them Doklam, and they are willing to give the northern territories which are disputed with Bhutan to Bhutan. So if this territorial swap happens, this is not good for India's security. And India has made sure that this doesn't happen. We have a very cordial relationship. In fact, the new government, the new top gear government, which has been elected, Prime Minister Modi visited Bhutan already, and Bhutan has given its highest civilian honor to Prime Minister Modi. A very good friendly relationship does exist. And the new government has also said that while resolving the territorial dispute with China, they will take into consideration the security concerns of India. India is an equal stakeholder in these border talks. And the Bhutanese government has also been very sensitive to this. So this is, again, this issue of India, Bhutan, this territorial disputes between China and Bhutan, which has been having an impact on India. This has been in the news. We covered it in the classes also, and you must discuss this in a lot of detail. As far as this particular short note is concerned, have to be very precise. Start with the cordialness of the relationship, then start talking about territorial dispute, Doklam standoff, and also how it will affect India's security. So this is how you can attempt this question. Again, a very straightforward question. I don't think you will have a problem dealing with this. The next Students, the next question, the third short note, that is, nothing is going to move within the WTO negotiations unless India is on board. It's a very good question, students. Again, you can easily understand the importance if you remember our class discussions. You've been given a statement. Nothing is going to move within the WTO negotiations unless India is on board. Discuss the main reasons behind India's increased clout in the WTO. So if you remember, students, you have to understand the essence of this particular question. If you remember, students, in the classes, I told you what is the most controversial issue in WTO. Which issue has been plaguing progress of WTO? North-South divide. North-South divide in WTO is the most controversial issue in WTO negotiations. And India represents what? India represents the global South. India is the voice of the global South. India has always articulated for the concerns of global South. India has always stood up for the concerns of global South in WTO negotiations. So there can be no progress in WTO unless, there is no reconciliation between the global North and the global South. And WTO is also based on consensus. WTO progress would not happen if all countries would agree, and they will not be able to sign multilateral agreements. And as far as India is concerned, India has a key here, because India represents the voice of the global South. Recently, we hosted the Voice of the Global South Summit. During India's presidency of the G20 summit, African Union was made part of a G20. So India has always represented interests of the global South. So India is one country which can help, become a bridge between global North and global South. This is also something which has been argued by realist scholars. And you must mention the names of the scholars also, like C. Raja Mohan. So India holds key for the future of WTO. India holds key. This is the main reason behind India's clout in WTO. And nothing is going to move within WTO negotiations unless India is on board. Because if India is not on board, that means global South is not on board. And India represents the interests of the global South. You may, in your answer, mention about WTO agreement on agriculture. How agreement on agriculture have been jeopardized because of tensions between global North and global South. What is India's position on subsidies? Blue blocks, amber box, green box subsidies. Also on a TRIPS agreement, what is India's stand? The difference of global North and global South on intellectual property rights. Also agreement in services. So all these WTO agreements have been jeopardized because of tensions between global North and global South. And you must mention all this in your answer. And India represents the interests of the global South. So until unless global South is not on board, and leader of global South, which is India, is not on board, this WTO negotiations are not going to move forward. You may also mention how, dispute settlement mechanism of WTO has been paralyzed, which has also been done by global North nations like US. And global South countries, they want to defend WTO. They want dispute settlement mechanism to be restored. So that is the reason why, if India is not on board, then, WTO negotiations cannot move forward. Nothing is going to move forward within WTO if India is not on board. India has a lot of clout in WTO because of it representing the interests of the global South countries. In fact, India, a few years, I told you in the class, India had a meeting of global South ministers in Delhi also to discuss progress of WTO. India has been demanding reforms of WTO. India has been demanding that WTO should cater to interests of not only the rich countries, but also developing and poor countries, global South. Trade is not the only agenda. Development should be the agenda. Doha development agenda was also supported by India and the developing countries. So whatever disputes we have in WTO today, tensions in WTO, they represent North-South divide. And India is the country representing global South, one of the leading members of the global South. India, therefore, in your concluding paragraph, you must mention that India, if India is on board, then WTO can certainly make progress. And also in the concluding paragraph, you must recommend that India must not play an obstructionist role. India should play a role of bridging the gap between global North and global South, because India is not a periphery state anymore. India now is a semi-periphery state, using the world system theory given by Emanuel Wallerstein, where India is described as a semi-periphery state. So India can bridge the gap between the both. India now has good relations with global North and global South both. And this can certainly streamline the functioning of WTO. So in that context, you can attempt this particular question. Then there was another short note. Let's discuss that one as well. Discuss the rationale behind replacing Asia-Pacific strategy with the new term Indo-Pacific strategy. Students, exactly this we discussed in our classes. If you remember my lecture on Indo-Pacific, this is how I started the lecture. I told you this region was earlier known as Asia-Pacific, but now it is described as a Indo-Pacific. And this is what we did in our lectures, and exactly that question has been asked, that discuss the rationale behind replacing why Asia-Pacific strategy has been replaced by this new term, Indo-Pacific strategy. So you have to discuss the rationale behind this, the reasons behind this. What is the reason of doing this? What are the reasons, compelling reasons, which have led to this change? And this is what we discuss in our classes, and you can easily attempt this. And you must start in your introductory paragraph, first of all, with how Indo-Pacific has come about. The term Indo-Pacific, students, if you remember, has been coined by the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. And this happened in India in 2007 in his speech addressing Indian Parliament, the confluence of the two seas speech which he delivered. That is where he coined the term Indo-Pacific, where he said Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean is a shared strategic space. Developments in one have an impact on the other, and we cannot divorce these two. We cannot put these two, Indian and Pacific Ocean, to different watertight compartments. Shinzo Abe had also given the idea of Asia's democratic security diamond, which we discussed in the class. Democratic security diamond, how democratic powers of the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, primarily India, should align with each other. This idea was also given by Shinzo Abe. So in your introductory paragraph itself, you must highlight how the idea of Indo-Pacific emerged. And then in the body of the answer, students, try and define what is Indo-Pacific. Definition given by C. Raja Mohan, India's definition of Indo-Pacific, USA's definition of Indo-Pacific, which have a subtle difference also. India would want to include the entire Indian Ocean in the understanding of Indo-Pacific, whereas America's understanding is that Indo-Pacific is a region which stretches from the west coast of USA to the west coast of India, whereas India would want it to stretch to east coast of Africa. And in layman terms, Indo-Pacific is a combination of Indian Ocean plus Pacific Ocean plus land masses surrounding these two oceans. And why this has happened, and then you must highlight why earlier this region was known as Asia-Pacific. Why Japan, US, and Western countries, European countries now have started using the term Indo-Pacific instead of Asia-Pacific in order to acknowledge the central importance of India in this region, in order to highlight the central importance of India in this region. India can help these countries counter China. This is part of the China containment strategy, shifting the focus from Asia-Pacific to Indo-Pacific. This also reflects the eastward tilt in the center of gravity of global politics. Earlier, the geopolitical tussle used to happen in the Atlantic Ocean. Now this has shifted to the Pacific. Pacific has become the the Indo-Pacific has become the center of gravity of global politics. Now it has transferred from the Euro-Atlantic zone. It's a geopolitical construct which has been which has been coined by the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, shifting the focus of global politics from Atlantic to the Pacific. And it's part of China containment policy. You must mention all of this. You must mention how, in the Indo-Pacific, initiatives like Quad, IPFs, SCRI, PGI have been launched to counter China, and India is part of all these initiatives. So by shifting the focus to Indo-Pacific, the Western powers, they want to highlight India's role in this region. They want to highlight India's role in this region and acknowledge India's importance in this particular region, which would help them counter China's dominance, which would help them counter the rising status of China in this region. And this is what we had discussed in the classes also, and you must mention this in your answers. And with examples, the initiatives which have been launched in Indo-Pacific, and also how China is a threat in Indo-Pacific, how China has been so aggressive, China's aggressive behavior in South China Sea, China's violation of international law in South China Sea, China's string of pearls policy in the Indian Ocean, trying to ring-fence India in the Indian Ocean, China's militarization of these oceans, setting up a naval base in Djibouti, setting up a new development of a new port in Gwadar in Pakistan, taking over the Hambantota seaport in Sri Lanka, the debt trap diplomacy of China, aggressive and exploitative Belt and Road Initiative, which has been causing tensions and threats in Indo-Pacific. So now to counter this viewpoint has come now, Indo-Pacific strategy instead of Asia-Pacific strategy, highlighting the role of India here. The primary role which India has played, they want to position Western countries, they want to position India to counter China. This is part of the external balancing strategy also. You must use the concept of balance of power also while attempting this particular question. And also students, in the concluding paragraphs, you must mention that India follows a policy of co-engagement. A policy of co-engagement where India would want to contain China whenever necessary and also engage with China whenever possible. This is what is recommended by Shyam Saran and C. Raja Mohan. And this Indo-Pacific narrative helps India to also secure its interests here and counter China. But at the same time, India is also engaging with China-led platforms also. India, what is India's Indo-Pacific narrative? India does not see Indo-Pacific as a region for power tussle. You may mention the 5S approach given by Prime Minister Modi. 5S approach, which stands for Samvad, Shanti, Samriddhi, Sahyog, all these values which India represent. Then you also must quote Shyam Saran here. Shyam Saran has said that India believes in ASEAN centrality in Indo-Pacific, which is a counter to China's claim of centrality. So that is how India is also trying to counter the Chinese, but at the same time, India follows policy of co-engagement as well. So India's role here, how this will help India secure its interests. That also you must mention in your concluding paragraphs, how this region is very important for India. Majority of India's trade, it goes through this region. So this is how you can attempt this particular question as well. So easily this could have been attempted. This was discussed in the classes, a lot of detail. And here your only challenge would be to summarize all of this in 150 words. How this discourse has changed. You must also mention the years, students, when India gave its Indo-Pacific policy, when America adopted this policy, when did Shinzo Abe coin the term in the speech he delivered in India, Conference of the Two Seas, addressing Indian Parliament in 2007. Then Americans also adopted it, and then India also adopted this term and this strategy of Indo-Pacific. And how our Act East policy, our vision of Sagar is helping us achieve our objectives in Indo-Pacific. So all these details can be mentioned here. And everything you have to connect with how this will help us counter China. That is why shift from Asia-Pacific to Indo-Pacific to highlight the central role of India in this region. The next short note, students, is despite deep ties, India's relations with Sri Lanka have seen strains due to China's growing influence in Sri Lanka through investments and economic dominance. Analyze. Again, students, it's a quite straightforward, very simple question. It is not a brain teaser. Easily you will be able to understand this. So many times we have had discussions on this in the classes. Yes, India has deep ties with Sri Lanka, cordial relations with Sri Lanka, no doubt about that. But they have been strains due to China's growing influence through investments and economic dominance. So what do you mean by this? You highlight the keywords here. Highlight the keywords. In your introductory paragraph, you start with how India and Sri Lanka have been such cordial friends. We've always had friendly relationship with each other. Write down about the historical context of the relationship. And then as you move on, in the body of the answer, you must start highlighting the Sri Lanka's tilt towards China. And Sri Lanka's tilt towards China happened during the tenure of a Rajapaksa family. Initially, the tenure of Mahinda Rajapaksa. And when Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president of Sri Lanka, that is when Sri Lanka joined the Belt and Road Initiative of China. And as a result of it, China started making investments in Sri Lanka and started enjoying economic dominance. And Sri Lanka is a classic case of China's debt trap diplomacy. Sri Lanka was not able to repay Chinese debt, because of which they had to give their Hambantota seaport to China for a lease period of 99 years. You must mention this. And how Hambantota port is being used by the Chinese to dock their spies and surveillance ships and also their submarines. They intend to use this for military ambitions also. It's not just for trade. There are indications that China wants to use Hambantota for its military misadventures as well. And we've discussed that in the classes also. You must quote all those examples. So this increasing presence of China in Sri Lanka, which happened during which happened during the tenure of Mahinda Rajapaksa, was a big concern for India. And that is the reason why in 2022, Sri Lanka was in a deep economic crisis, an external debt crisis. And this economic crisis led to political crisis in Sri Lanka also. Gotabaya Rajapaksa government had to resign and flee the country. Similar events which have happened in Bangladesh this year happened 2 years ago in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka has been emerging an important pearl in China's string of pearls policy. So this will have an impact on India's security interests, of course. But India continues to follow neighborhood first policy as defined by Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar. We are engaging with Sri Lanka. We are generous towards Sri Lanka. We are non-reciprocal towards Sri Lanka. We are investing in Sri Lanka to secure our interests. And this is what we did in 2022. In 2022, India gave a financial assistance package of $4 billion to Sri Lanka in order to help Sri Lanka overcome the economic crisis, which has again strengthened India-Sri Lanka relations and would help India counter the rising presence of China in Sri Lanka. And this happened. You may give an example how Sri Lankans had signed contracts with Chinese companies for power projects. Chinese companies had signed contracts to develop power projects in northern Sri Lanka, just 50 kilometers away from Chennai, on islands which were 50 kilometers away from Chennai. Indian government requested the Sri Lankan government to cancel these contracts and instead sign it with Indian companies. And exactly that happened. The Sri Lankan government has cancelled these Chinese contracts and signed the same contracts to develop power projects with Indian companies. And India would do it as a grant and not as a loan, whereas Chinese were doing it as a loan. So Sri Lanka has suffered China's debt trap and now is trying to do course correction, and India is taking advantage of that now. Since 2022, we have seen that India has been a big partner, assistance partner of Sri Lanka, and is trying to secure our interests in this context. So there have been strains in the relationship. Certainly, there were these strains, especially when Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president, and when Gotabaya Rajapaksa, his brother, became the president later, and Mahinda Rajapaksa became the prime minister, there were strains. But now that the governments have changed, now that Sri Lanka has learned its lesson, it suffered a huge external debt crisis because of China and also because of the pandemic. India, and also because of the policy of Gotabaya Rajapaksa regarding organic farming, Sri Lanka has again turned towards India now. India's also now got India's also signed an agreement with Sri Lanka to develop Trincomalee Harbour as well. Investments in Trincomalee oil farms. Also, Indian companies like the Adani Group have signed contracts to develop a port terminal in Colombo as well. So all of this you must mention here. And then you also highlight the views of the experts, highlight the views of the realist experts, how it's important to secure our interest there, as argued by C. Raja Mohan, as argued by when India gave financial package. D. Subbarao also wrote on this, which also we discussed in the class and you may mention here. You must also bring in IR theories, how Sri Lanka has been insecure in the past because of the imbalance of power with India, which made them tilt toward the Chinese, and we must address these insecurities by developing a relationship of mutual trust and mutual understanding, by implementing the agenda of our neighborhood first policy and vision of Sagar. So all these points you must mention here. Easily you can attempt this. So these are the 5 short notes which were asked in section B. And now let's discuss the long questions as well. Question number 6. This was the question which we discussed number of times, students, in our classes. In our classes, we discussed this question. In fact, I had given you model answers also on this. This was the question in the test series also. The test series which we conducted, in that also this question was asked. And exactly the same question has been asked in the paper. It's just that the language has changed. And what does the question say? It says, it's a 20 marker. Would you concur with the view that of late India's foreign policy has been in a transition mode from Nehruvianism to neoliberalism? Support your answer with the help of suitable examples. Of course, you will have to give examples. So this is a question which we discussed in our classes also, how Indian foreign policy over the years have evolved, and it has taken a neoliberal turn. And this we discussed in the class, and you must mention this, how you in your answer itself, you must mention this, how as far as India is concerned, when this Nehruvian policy of non-alignment was launched, which were too idealistic and too optimistic. And Nehruvian idealism had backfired also, because we lost territories to 2 neighbors, Pakistan and China, during the initial years. And therefore, Nehruvian idealism was criticized. Even Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar has criticized that it was an era of optimistic non-alignment. The Nehruvian policy, which was foreign policy, which was followed. Optimistic, too idealistic, the non-alignment policy. And then later you can write down about the evolution, how his daughter Indira Gandhi wasn't idealist. She was a realist. And she followed the realist doctrine in securing India's interests. She's the one who led the war with led the war in 1971, along with General Sam Manekshaw. And we were able to liberate this East Pakistan territory and form a new country called Bangladesh, which considerably weakened Pakistan. So since then the policy started changing. Then Rajiv Gandhi was the one who went to China in 1988 and did economic compartmentalization of relations, where he was the one who said that India-China economic relationship must continue. India-China must develop an economic relationship. And there should be no such condition that they cannot have a relation unless they do not resolve their border disputes, unless they do not resolve the border disputes. So since that 1988 visit of Rajiv Gandhi, normalization of India-China relations started. India-China relations started normalizing, particularly economic relationship. And India started doing trade with the Chinese. And China, over the years, have emerged as one of the biggest trading partners of India. So we saw that definitely a neoliberal turn, Indian policy took after that. And as we enter the 90s, you know very well, you must mention 1991, India opened up the economy. Narasimha Rao was the prime minister. Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister. A new economic policy was adopted. Again, a new liberal turn was taken in our foreign policy also. From a closed economy, we became an open economy. India became part of the globalized world. Neoliberalism, globalization, Washington consensus. We accepted all that. FDI, FII investments started pouring into India, which also helped India develop relations with America, with Japan. The tilt towards the West started. The multinational corporations were allowed to make investments in India, MNCs. India became an integral part of the globalized world, which has benefited India also. So there's certainly a neoliberal turn. Nehruvian policy was more of an idealistic policy. Also, it had socialistic foundations. But now certainly we've turned towards neoliberalism. You must give all these examples. Also, you must write down how and why this change happened, what triggered this change. End of Cold War was certainly one of the reasons why this happened. And also, the end of Cold War was not just defeat of Soviet Union. Francis Fukuyama, he said it is end of history. That is victory of capitalism over communism. The victory of liberal capitalism over communism. So India, that is a time when the world order changed and a liberal international economic order emerged. And India also became a part of that, essential part of that, by opening up its economy. You can see a neoliberal turn in Indian foreign policy, definitely. Then also, give examples how India has been signing free trade agreements with countries. Recently, we signed FTA, a TEPA agreement with 4 European countries. We've signed with UAE. We've signed with the Japanese. We've signed with ASEAN. With many countries, we have signed FTAs. We have opened up our economy. We've allowed foreign investments in our economy. So all these neoliberal trends which you see in Indian foreign policy, how India has now joined IPF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, SCRI, Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. These are latest examples which again reflect the neoliberal trend in Indian foreign policy. So we have, obviously, our foreign policy is more and more. In fact, now India, along with China, has become the biggest defenders of WTO and globalization. There's a backlash against globalization coming from the developed world, but India wants to sustain globalization and also wants WTO, also has been defending WTO, World Trade Organization, because India now is a semi-periphery economy. And semi-peripheries are the showcases of globalization. They are the new beneficiaries of globalization, as argued by Immanuel Wallerstein in the world system theory. You must mention it here. So India and China have been playing a prominent role now sustaining the future of globalization. India is also playing a prominent role in a post-pandemic globalized world where India is focusing on developing resilient supply chains. So there is, of course, a neoliberal turn in Indian foreign policy. From Nehruvianism, Indian foreign policy has moved towards neoliberalism. That is there. And that is a major reason for India's strategic partnership with the Americans, with the Japanese, with the West, that India has adopted neoliberal model, has opened up its economy. So this is something which you should, all these examples you must give and highlight in this your answer. In a concluding paragraph, you must also mention that it's not that we are blindly following neoliberalism. Indian foreign policy is also very realistic. India takes into consideration that India also have to secure its interests. So India has been making strategic use of protectionism also in order to protect its own infant industries and domestic industries. India has not signed RCEP agreement with the Indo-Pacific states. India has also, has been reluctant in signing multilateral FTAs, is more comfortable signing bilateral FTAs. Because India at the same time realizes that we want to secure our industrial base as well, which may not be able to compete with the foreign MNCs. We haven't liberalized the agriculture sector. We haven't liberalized the dairy sector. So there is a strategic use of protectionism also, which India is doing. We're trying to achieve a golden middle between protectionism and openness, globalization, as suggested by Jagdish Bhagwati, which we had discussed in our lectures. And also scholars like Ramesh Thakur and George Heen had suggested that we should try and achieve a golden middle between the two, openness and also protectionism. So that's how you should conclude in your answers. So this is also a theme which we had discussed in our classes. And in the test series also, we asked this question, and the same question was asked in the paper. And it was a 20-mark question. So detailed answer with examples you have to mention. Then, a 15-mark question was there. And this question says, does the idea of the 21st century as Asian century continue to remain feasible given the growing friction between India and China? So students, it's a good question. I would say it's a very good question, which prompts you to think that it is basically taking into consideration the present trend in global politics. What is the present trend as far as global politics is concerned? So yes, there has been this debate that the future is about, the 21st century is all about Asian century, rise of Asia. But is this narrative becoming more and more weak today because of growing tensions between India and China? That is what you have to analyze in your answer here. So of course, you must, in the introductory paragraph, you must mention how it is becoming an Asian century, how 21st century is all about rise of Asia, a rise of semi-periphery economies of Asia like India and China. China, the second largest economy of the world, India, the fifth largest economy of the world, is driving the global growth engine. China is the biggest export economy of the world. So definitely the 21st century is all about the rise of Asia. It's an Asian century. These two powers are the powers of the future. They'll play a major role in the future world order. You must mention this in your introductory paragraph. And then also highlight in the introductory paragraph itself that these two are also engaged in power tussle and competition, which may have a dampening effect on this Asian century. And once you write that, then in the body of the answer, you start writing about these problems which are there. India and China, yes, you write down about the conflict dimension. India, China have conflicts. They have border disputes. They also are engaged in an economic tussle. China has trade surplus over India. China has been following the string of pearls policy. India has boycotted the Belt and Road Initiative. So these point of tussle, India also has criticized China on South China Sea dispute. So these points of tension which are there, you must mention in your answer, of course. But then you also must write down in your answer, students, you must highlight both sides of the divide. One side of the debate says that because India and China are rivals, therefore this will jeopardize the whole narrative of the Asian century. And you talk about those conflicts and talk about that narrative also. But there's another narrative that India and China together will lead liberal internationalism 3.0 as argued by G. John Ikenberry. Semi-periphery states are taking up the responsibility of leading globalization in the future because developed countries are on, there's a backlash against globalization from the developed nations as argued by Joseph Stiglitz. And that is, of course, that is visible also. It's, as far as India is concerned, India is trying to follow a policy of co-engagement with China. We want to contain China. Of course, in international politics, states are driven by relative gains. There is security dilemma situation. Of course, there is competition between these two. But that does not mean that the future of Asia is not in safe hands. We are trying to contain China, but we engage with China also. Mention about that as well. We are cooperating with each other as well. We are working together at the BRICS platform. India is the second largest investor in AIIB. Both of them are part of NDB, New Development Bank. They have a strong trading relationship. China is our largest trading partner. Mention Herbert Wolf. Herbert Wolf says India-China relationship is described with the help of 3 C's: competition, conflict, and also cooperation. So if there is competition, conflict, you also have cooperation. So it's not that the Asian century, the narrative of Asian century would be completely jeopardized because of this. But of course, the Western powers would take advantage of this. They would want to take advantage of this. But India is aware of this. Therefore, in the Indo-Pacific policy, which Prime Minister Modi outlined in his speech in the East Asia Summit, which he had outlined the 6 principles of India's Indo-Pacific policy, he had said that for India, Indo-Pacific is not a geopolitical theater of tussle. India will not be a part of any camp. India follows policy of multi-alignment. India follows the principle of 5S approach. Samvad, Sahyog, Shanti, Samriddhi. 5S approach. India follows the approach of Sagar. So India is willing to engage with the countries in Asia. That includes China also, provided China does not harm India's core security interests. So there are points of tussle, but there is also an indication that India does not see this as a geopolitical theater of tussle. And India has refrained from taking sides and joining camps. India is multi-aligned. So therefore, there is a lot of hope, and there is a good possibility that these 2 countries, they are going to represent the rise of Asia in coming times as well. So you must mention, this is how you can analyze this particular question and do justice to the demands of the question. I hope you will be able to do this. We had similar discussions in the classes also. Then the next question, students, was also on expected lines. I was strongly expecting this question. I told all my students you should prepare for this. And we had discussed this in the classes. I had given you notes also on this. India and the Global South. Because India recently hosted the Global South Summit, Voice of the Global South Summit. And definitely this was on the lines that we are going to get a question on India and Global South. And exactly that is the question. Discuss the potential role that India could play as the leader of the Global South in realizing the goal of establishing a new international economic order. New international economic order, the chapter of NEO, and India and Global South. This question is framed on the basis of the discussions which we had done in 2 chapters of the syllabus. India and the Global South and NEO. So what is the potential role India can play as the leader of the Global South in realizing goals of NEO? This is what the question is. So in the introductory paragraph itself, students, you must mention India has been the champion of the Global South. India has been the voice of the Global South. Recently also, India hosted Voice of the Global South summits. Last year, during India's presidency, African Union was made member of G20. You must mention in the introductory paragraph itself. And India has always articulated for the concerns of the Global South at all global platforms. India has tried to be a voice of the Global South. In the body of the answer, you may make subheadings. You may start by writing down India's support for NEO. India was a big supporter of new international economic order. There should be redistribution of the wealth at the world level. The developing countries should also get equal opportunities as far as growth and development is concerned. They should also have equal access to the resources of the world. All the demands of NEO, India has supported. One by one, you can talk about all the. India supports UN reforms. India supports disarmament. India supports the reforms of WTO, IMF, World Bank. India supports Doha development agenda in WTO. There should be redistribution of wealth. There should be international law based on equity, rule-based order. India supports the reforms of the Security Council, reform of the UN General Assembly. So all the demands which were there in new international economic order, India has supported those demands. Yes, India today is part of a globalized world, but at the same time, India articulates the concerns of Global South. You may again write down this. In WTO negotiations, India has taken a position for Global South. In environmental negotiations and COP meetings, India has taken a position for Global South. CBDR principle, India's commitment that India's support for Global South, that Global North countries must commit more funds to Global South in order to enable them to mitigate and adapt to climate change. All this, India also how India has taken a vocal position against the threat of terrorism. Also, India has taken a vocal position to regulate multinational corporations as well. So all this India recently hosted the Voice of the Global South Summit. The developments which happened during the Voice of the Global South Summit, mention that also in your answer. Also mention how Global South agenda was a priority for India during India's presidency of the G20 summit last year, which also we discussed in the classes. You must mention that as well. In the concluding paragraph, after mentioning all these points, you must mention, students, how NEO is still relevant. It's very relevant. There are vast amount of countries of Africa, Asia, Latin America, which have been suffering from underdevelopment, and they do not get equal access to the resources of the world. And India stands for it. And also, you must mention in your concluding paragraph that China is not able to play this role because China is a semi-periphery which has become a new exploiter of the periphery because of its exploitative BRI policy, debt trap diplomacy. But India, being a semi-periphery economy, is still sensitive for the concerns of the global south. India's Africa approach is also based on Africa's priorities, not India's selfish interests, which China has been. China is a mineral grabbing country in Africa. China has been following an approach of resource extraction in Africa, which India does not done. India, for example, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, there are 3 equal partners there, Africa, India, and Japan. India follows a bottoms-up approach, whereas Chinese have been following a top-down approach. So China, as a semi-periphery, is becoming a new exploiter of the periphery, but India is not doing that. India stands for the global south and interests of the global south, and therefore can play a very important role in revival of new international economic order. You must mention in your answers. You may also use viewpoints of scholars like Shamsaran also here, or even Harsh V. Pant has argued on similar lines. So you must use the theories, bring in core periphery, semi-periphery model, bring in theory, and bring in your views of the experts as well to make your answer academically rich. Then also, students, question number 7. Again a 20 marker, again a question on expected lines. This, I don't even remember how many times we discussed this in the classes. And these questions were there in the test series also. I circled model answers with you also. Again, the entire paper, students, is from our class discussions and the notes. And in fact, the question is, discuss the future of SAARC in the light of India's increased focus on other regional groupings like ASEAN and BIMSTEC. So students, it's a 20 marker long answer. In the introductory paragraph, you must talk about stagnation of SAARC. How SAARC was supposed to ensure regional cooperation and integration and multilateralism in South Asia, but it has failed. It has become a jammed vehicle, as argued by Dr. Subramaniam Jayashankar. Then also mention the reasons for its failure in the body of the answer. How SAARC has been failing. The SAARC has been failing because of which reasons? India-Pakistan rivalries, structural asymmetry. The origin of SAARC was also quite on negative grounds, skeptical grounds, where Bangladesh President Ziaur Rahman wanted to counter India with the help of such groupings. So that was also one reason why initially India was skeptical about SAARC. Then also, the big brother, small brother syndrome, insecurities of India's small neighbors, identity crisis, the rule of consensus, the SAFTA failing because the South Asian economies are not complementary, they are competitive, lack of connectivity, non-tariff barriers. Last SAARC summit was held 10 years ago, 2014. It's a jammed vehicle, stagnant organization. Therefore, India is losing interest in SAARC. And India is now, there's an apparent eastward tilt in Indian foreign policy. India is now giving more importance to these bodies, ASEAN and BIMSTEC, which is also an integral part of our Act East policy. You must mention in your answers. What is the approach now India following? India is now following an approach of SAARC minus Pakistan. Therefore, future of SAARC is very difficult. Revival of SAARC is very difficult now because India has given up on SAARC. India is following an approach of SAARC minus Pakistan. Argue views of Rajiv Bhatia here, Harsh V. Pant here, other IR scholars which we had discussed in our classes and given notes on these lines. India is now giving more importance to BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC has adopted a new charter 2 years ago in 2022, BIMSTEC charter. Prime Minister Modi has suggested signing of FTA among BIMSTEC countries, free trade agreement among the BIMSTEC countries. So Prime Minister Modi has also suggested a free trade agreement among BIMSTEC countries. Free trade agreement, Prime Minister Modi said, FTA can become a bridge of prosperity in the Bay of Bengal. India has contributed $1 million to the BIMSTEC budget. This year, 2024, BIMSTEC budget, summit will be hosted by Thailand. Every 2 years, BIMSTEC now has a summit. It has a new structure with 7 pillars. 7 members responsible for 7 pillars. It will have a summit every 2 years, a new international personality, a new emblem, new flag. So India sees more energy and mindset in BIMSTEC. This is what Dr. Subramaniam Jayashankar has said. You must argue in your answers on these lines. Similarly, India is giving a lot of importance to ASEAN. ASEAN centrality. ASEAN centrality. India stands for this idea. India follows this idea. This is the idea which India, this is ASEAN centrality principle India follows in its Indo-Pacific policy. One of the 6 principles of India's Indo-Pacific policy is ASEAN centrality. Every year, India-ASEAN summit is held. Every year, Prime Minister Modi attended the previous summit. He went to Southeast Asia, attended the previous summit. Every year, annually, India-ASEAN summit is held. We already have an FTA also with ASEAN countries. You must also mention how India is strongly engaging with ASEAN. It's part of our Act East policy. And ASEAN centrality principle, viewpoint of Sham Saran. ASEAN centrality principle negates China's claim towards centrality. It would also help us counter the increasing presence of China in these countries, in Southeast Asian and BIMSTEC nations. But you also must mention challenges which India may face. Our small neighbors are not in favor of the idea of replacing SAARC with BIMSTEC. Also, we'll have to get Maldives into BIMSTEC. Also, BIMSTEC has not been very effective. Since 1997, it had only 5 summits. It will be a test of India's generosity also. China's role will always be a challenge. So that is how you must write. And then the concluding paragraphs mention how a future of SAARC can be ensured. Future of SAARC can be ensured if the 2 most important countries in South Asia, Pakistan and India, if they change their attitude and policy. As Dr. Happy Mohan Jacob has said, India must not follow a zero-sum approach vis-a-vis Pakistan. India's policy will have to be more pragmatic and more flexible. India should not have a rigid stand on SAARC. SAARC is not about only Pakistan. It's not only about Pakistan. India must not reject SAARC only because of Pakistan. The Islamabad summit was cancelled because of the Uri terror attack. Since then, there has been no SAARC summit. Also, as far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan also should understand that they should stop sponsoring terrorism and stop playing an obstructionist role in SAARC. Then only the future and revival of SAARC is possible. So this is what you must mention in your concluding paragraphs also. And you must mention that if regional cooperation in South Asia is ensured, the liberal narrative, liberal institutionalism, this will be good for the peace, stability, and progress of South Asia. Therefore, the small neighbors of India has been favoring revival of SAARC. And they blame India and Pakistan for the stagnation of SAARC also. Leaders of Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka have repeatedly commented on this. So this is how you can attempt this particular question. Again and again, I would say, again, this was done in the classes also in a lot of detail. Then the next question for 15 marks. This question says, critically examine India's persistent refusal to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, despite being recognized as a de facto nuclear power. You have to critically examine India's persistent refusal. Why is India not signing NPT? What are India's reservations? What are India's concerns with this treaty? And again, students, this question discussed in classes in so much of detail. In the test series, students, this question was there. And I had certain model answers with the students. They would have been easily able to attempt this. So why we have to examine India's persistent refusal to sign NPT. Despite being a nuclear power state, a de facto nuclear power state. Why de facto? Because we have got waivers from NSG and IAEA, which we have discussed in the classes, because of which India has been recognized as a de facto nuclear power, but India is not in favor of signing NPT. Why? So in the introductory paragraph itself, students, you must first of all start writing on this note that how India has always been supportive of nuclear disarmament. India has been supportive of nuclear non-proliferation. And India has commitment. India is the only nuclear power state in the world which believes that India's security would be best ensured in a world free of nuclear weapons. India would be the first one to give up nuclear weapons if others also would give up. India believes in universal, verifiable, non-discriminatory, time-bound nuclear disarmament. You must mention this in your introductory paragraph itself. However, India has not signed NPT. Why? Now in the body of the answer, the right reasons why we haven't signed NPT. Because it only checks horizontal proliferation. It does not check vertical proliferation. It creates nuclear haves and nuclear have-nots, nuclear apartheid. It is discriminatory. It is giving structural power to the nuclear weapon states. They're enjoying structural power. They are making the rules of the game. The idea of structural power given by Susan Strange. They are allowed to keep nuclear weapons. They can even develop more nuclear weapons, but others are being deprived of this. So if you have to ban nuclear weapons and use and development of nuclear weapons, then do it for everyone. Why these 5 nuclear weapon states have been allowed? As per NPT, India is not. India has a principal disagreement with this. Also, NPT does not have any roadmap for nuclear disarmament. Therefore, India has not signed NPT. India has also not signed CTBT, or because of similar reasons. But India supports the idea of disarmament. India supports the idea of nuclear non-proliferation. But these treaties are not satisfactory from India's point of view. The NPT is a discriminatory treaty. Also, if you must also highlight, yes, India is a de facto nuclear power. Why? Because India has got waivers from NSG and IAEA. India is committed towards the principles of these two bodies: Multilateral Export Control Regime, Nuclear Suppliers Group, and International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a nuclear watchdog agency of the world. India signed safeguards agreement with IAEA. India has opened up its civilian nuclear facilities for IAEA inspections. India has separated military and civilian nuclear facilities. India has no first use nuclear doctrine, where India has been able to tell the world that our nuclear weapons are not for an offensive purpose, but for a defensive purpose. Defensive realism, not offensive realism. We do not want to threaten others. We are not, we're not going for this power maximization arms race. We have acquired nuclear weapons in order to maximize our security maximization because of threat of nuclear power states like China. So India's nuclear doctrine is also defensive. No first use doctrine. India wants to develop credible minimum deterrence. India has argued on these lines that our nuclear weapons are not for an offensive purpose, but for a defensive purpose. But we are not willing to be a part of NPT, which is discriminatory. We have principal disagreement with that. You may highlight the viewpoints of Mr. Subramaniam, M.K. Narayanan on India's nuclear doctrine and India's stand on disarmament. In a concluding paragraph, write down about Rajiv Gandhi Action Plan on Disarmament, which India had submitted to UN in 1988. Which India talked about universal, verifiable, time-bound, non-discriminatory disarmament. India would be willing to give up nuclear weapons if this is achieved, if the UN is able to do this. India also wants that all nuclear weapons treaties, which intend to ban nuclear weapons, should be negotiated at the platform of Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. India has taken up a strong position in CD. India also supports FMCT, Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty. You may quote Gandhi also, India's philosopher Gandhi, who had said use of nuclear weapon is the most diabolical use of science. India is a peace-loving nation, would never favor this. But we've developed nuclear weapon in order to ensure our own security. We would not want India to suffer what Ukraine is suffering today. China is a nuclear weapon state because NPT allowed China to have nuclear weapons. Therefore, we had to develop the nuclear weapon. If they are willing to adopt a treaty which would ban nuclear weapons for all nations equally, India would be the first one to support it. So this is what you should mention in your answer here. Then the next question, again for 15 marks. India and US have become such strong strategic partners that they need not become formal allies. You have to comment on this statement. Again, a very good question. India and US does not have a military alliance. They are not formal allies. They do not have a military alliance. India is not part of NATO. India has not joined NATO plus. So they are not military alliance partners. And is it still sufficient? What the kind of relationship which we have, the strong strategic partnership which we have with the Americans, is it sufficient for India? India and US have become such strong strategic partners that they need not become formal allies. That's a statement that there's no need to become formal allies there's no need to become military alliance partners because we have a very strong strategic relationship with US. And you have to comment on this statement. So there's so many aspects in this particular statement which you'll have to argue in your answer, which you'll have to discuss in your answer. In the introductory paragraph, it says, students, first of all, you must describe what is relationship of India with US. What is the status of India-US relationship? You must mention that first. So India and US are strategic partners. They are defense partners. India has a comprehensive global strategic partnership with US. India has a strong defense partnership with US. India has signed multiple defense agreements with US. But we are not military alliance partners. India has not joined any military alliance with US. So the status of the relationship, based on shared democratic traditions which have been developed, shared secular traditions which have been developed, you should mention in your introductory paragraph. In the body of the answer, you must highlight that why India is not willing to become a military alliance partner of US, why we are not formal allies, why do we not join a military alliance led by US? What are the reasons for that? First of all, India believes in the principle of a strategic autonomy. And if you join a military alliance, your strategic autonomy would be compromised. And India doesn't, like Dr. Happy Mohan Jacob says, there is no need to over rely on unpredictable partners like US. Do not put all your eggs into one basket. In an emerging multipolar world, India is following principle of multi-alignment, which is based on strategic autonomy. We are in all the camps rather than committing only to one particular camp. We're engaging with China, Russia, we're engaging with the Americans, with Europe, with Israel, with Iran, all at the same time, multi-alignment policy. This will best secure India's national interests in an emerging multipolar world. American hegemony is on the decline. You must mention this in your answers. You must mention how, as far as India is concerned, India, in an emerging multipolar world, India's interest would be best secure if we follow multi-alignment. India is trying to do strategic hedging. And also at the same time, even though we are not, you must mention in your answer that even though we are not military alliance partners, but we have a very strong strategic and defense relationship. Whatever new developments have happened in the relationship, you must mention. India has joined US-led initiatives like Quad, like IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Supply chain resilience initiative launched by America to develop resilience in semiconductor supply chains. Also, India is doing that with the help of Americans. We are cooperating on that as well. Also, we have joined PGI, which is led by US, Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, which would help us counter BRI. IMEC projects recently signed. It's a PGI project, India, Middle East, Europe corridor. You must mention how, we have strong defense ties. We have been buying Apache helicopters, MQ-9B drones from America. We also intend to do joint development of weapons. We have launched Indus-X initiative for joint development of defense technologies. We have launched an initiative for critical and emerging technologies in order to jointly develop critical and emerging technologies. India is also part of the multilateral mineral security partnership led by US. India and US are implementing the idea argued by Nicholas Lamp. Resilience is the new ingredient of globalization. India and US are both committed to this in order to counter China's economic dominance, in order to reduce dependence on China-led supply chains. Then also, you must mention our defense ties, strong defense ties. We've signed LAMOA, we've signed COMCASA, we've signed BECA, we've signed General Security of Military Information Agreement. Also, how this is going to, as far as a defense partnership is concerned, India and US would also now also intend to do joint production of weapons. GE, American company General Electric, and Hindustan Aeronautics Limited is jointly manufacturing fighter jet engines. So very strong relationship has developed, no doubt about that. And this will help secure India's interests. This will help India contain China. This will help India safeguard its interests in Indo-Pacific. India and US, they have a common objective, common narrative for the Indo-Pacific, which we have already discussed in this session, in this discussion. All that also you must mention, how the Western nations have been trying to foment India, develop India as a counter to China. And India is part of that. However, again, you must mention in your concluding paragraphs, we are not in favor of having a formal military alliance with US because we give importance to strategic autonomy. American hegemony is on the decline. It's not wise to join a sinking ship. We follow multi-alignment policy, which will best secure India's interests. India cannot jeopardize its relationship with Russia because of Americans. We are not willing to become a bandwagoning state of US. India is not in favor of doing bandwagoning of US. We cannot jeopardize relations with Russia. If we jeopardize relations with Russia, then a nexus, a trilateral nexus between Russia, Pakistan, and China will emerge against India. A counter alliance will emerge, which would be detrimental for India's interests. So India has been doing delicate balancing between India, Russia, India, US, India, Iran, India, Russia, India, China, India, US, India, Iran, India, US. So we are balancing our relations. We have friendship with Russia, with US also. We have friendship with US and Iran also. We have friendship with US, and we are engaging with the economically engaging with the Chinese also. So we are trying to do delicate balancing in our relationships. The policy of multi-alignment, how we have transitioned from non-alignment to multi-alignment. So on these note, you must end your answer, conclude your answer. So in this question, you have to highlight the importance of the relationship, what we are doing with America and how it is serving our interests. But it is not in our interest to develop a formal military alliance relationship, which will jeopardize our other interests, will compromise our strategic autonomy. Russia relationship, Iran relationship is equally important for India. And we cannot jeopardize our Russia-Iran relationship because of the Americans. That would not be in the good interest of India. So this is what you have to mention in this particular. Again, students, I'm so happy that all of this was discussed in our classes. Detailed notes were given to you on all these topics. And if you've done proper revisions of all of that, I'm sure you must have been so confident at attempting this paper. Everything is from the class discussion and notes circulated in the classes. And icing on the cake, we did answer writing practice in the classes. We had these questions given to you, model answers given to you. In the test series also, these questions were asked. Then, the next question, question number 8. Let's discuss this as well. Critically examine the continuity and change in India's Palestine policy in the wake of the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. This is again, on expected lines. This is a question which I was expecting. And this is something which we discussed in the classes in so much of detail. That what is the continuity, examine the continuity and change in India's Palestine policy in the wake of the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. So in the introductory paragraph, mention this context, Israel-Hamas war. How Israel-Hamas war is a big challenge for India. It is challenging for India to balance India-Israel and India-Palestine relations in the wake of this war. The human rights violations happening in Gaza, India does not support that. India is against that. But at the same time, we have strong cordial relations with the Israelis as well. So balancing India-Israel and India-Palestine relations in the wake of this war has become very difficult, challenging for India. You must mention this context in your introductory paragraph. And then in the body of the answer, you must make 2 subheadings. Critically examine continuity and change. So what is the continuity in our Palestine policy? We continue to support 2-state solution. India is a strong supporter of the 2-state solution, which was product of the UN negotiations, which we discussed in the class. 2-state solution on Israel-Palestine territorial dispute. India has given diplomatic recognition to Palestine. We have a Palestinian diplomatic mission in India. So India supports Palestine on that issue, on 2-state solution. India is a big supporter, and India continues to support Palestine on that issue. India is also not in favor of use of violence and human rights violations of the Palestinians. India has always stood up against this, and today we are. But what is the change in the policy? Change is India has a de-hyphenated Israel-Palestine policy. We continue to support 2-state solution, but at the same time, we have developed strong cordial relations with Israel, whereas earlier during the Cold War period, we had no diplomatic relations with Israel. We used to always favor Palestine. But now, in the post-Cold War era, India has developed strong diplomatic relations with Israel. Prime Minister Modi had become the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel. Prime Minister Vajpayee said India and Israel are natural allies. The Benjamin Netanyahu has said India-Israel marriage is made in heaven. Strong cordial defense strategic relationship has developed with Israel. India has been buying high-tech weapons from Israel. Cooperation in agriculture technology, drip irrigation, water conservation. In all this, India is cooperating with the Israelis. So our Israel policy is not hyphenated to our Palestine position now. Our Israel policy, our Israel relationship is independently developing now, independent of our stand on Palestine. So India's Palestine-Israel policy has been de-hyphenated. That is the change which has happened, students. And you must mention this in your answer. And we discussed this in the classes. India now has been in many cases where resolutions are brought against Israel. in Human Rights Council and such UN bodies, India had abstained from voting. So you must mention all of this. But at the same time, in the concluding paragraph, you must again mention how challenging it is for India now to sustain this stand of dehyphenation between Israel-Palestine policy because of the human rights violations of the innocent Palestinians, women and children, which is happening in Gaza right now. India would want to disassociate itself from all this repression. And therefore, India has been favoring ceasefire in Gaza. So in this context, the challenge has, of course, emerged for India. You may quote Ishrat Aziz, Professor Kumaraswamy in this particular answer also on India-Israel relationship. Professor Kumaraswamy being the authority on India-Israel relations. One of the best experts in the country. We discuss in the classes his viewpoints, and you may use that also in this particular question. So that's how you can attempt this question. Next question is based. So students, this is a question where I can say is a question based strictly on current development. A lot of you have this fear in your mind. PSIR is dynamic. It's very dynamic. A lot of current issues are asked. Only this question, students. Only one question so far in our discussion, which is strictly based on a current development, a factual current development. Obviously, current geopolitical trends are there in all questions, which we all cover in the classes. But a factual development which happened recently, on that you have this one question. And what is that factual development regarding India-Myanmar? Discuss the implication of the scrapping of free movement regime with Myanmar by the Indian government on the complex ethno-political dynamics of the northeastern region. So this happened this year in 2024 in the month of February. Ministry of Home Affairs announced, sent a press release that India is scrapping the free movement regime which we have in Myanmar. So in the introductory paragraph, first of all, mention what is this free movement regime. As per this regime, because people living in Myanmar and India, they have ethnic relations, they have familial ties, historical ties, cultural ties. It was an artificial border drawn by Britishers without taking into consideration the ground realities. So for respecting those sentiments of people staying on the borders, we had a free movement regime where people living in the distance of 16 kilometers from the border on both sides were free to traverse across the border using border passes and continue having traditional cultural economic relations with each other. That was the policy which we used to follow with Myanmar. You must mention this in the introductory paragraph. And the body of the answer, you must mention that now India this year has scrapped this policy. Why? Give reasons. This has been done in order to, safeguard India's internal security. This has been done for internal security reasons. Why? Because this free movement across the border is also exploited by Indian insurgent groups, which are operating from Myanmar's territory. So because of internal security reasons, it has been done. Secondly, it has been done because of demographic reasons. There is a lot of migration happening because a military junta government is there in Myanmar. And a lot of people living in West Myanmar provinces, they have been trying to migrate to India. There are refugees coming into India, Chin community especially, which may change the demographics of this Northeast Indian states. And this is also being seen as one of the reasons, articulated as one of the reasons for ethnic tensions in Manipur also. Meitei community has opposed this as well. So because of these reasons, India has decided to scrap this. And these reasons you must list in your answer. But then there is also a second, viewpoint also. Discuss all views. There's a view that this is not a step in the right direction, because we must respect the historical ethnic ties and cultural ties which people have across the border. And now the government have decided to fence the entire Myanmar border, which is there with the Northeast Indian states, which is again not in line with our old commitment, where we used to respect the cultural and ethnic ties which were there between the border people staying on both sides of the border. So that should also be highlighted here. So give the reasons, and also give a critical viewpoint why this is a departure from our past approach, where you used to respect the familial and ethnic relationships which used to exist, but we do not respect that anymore now, because we have scrapped this free movement regime. And this is related to the ethnic tensions in Manipur. This is related to the military junta government of Myanmar, and you must highlight that in your answer. Then also, students, the last question of section B. Again, this is a question directly picked up from class notes. This particular question. It says, India has of late chosen to debunk non-alignment in its pursuit of multi-alignment. You have to comment on this. I discussed this with you in the classes. I gave you notes in the classes how India has transitioned from non-alignment to multi-alignment. We had a discussion on this, how India has transitioned from non-alignment to multi-alignment, and that is exactly why this question has been exactly what this question has been asked in the paper. I also gave you notes on this. We discussed questions on this also in the classes. So again, it's a very similar question to that, where we have one more question. So on the same theme, 2 questions have been asked in the paper this year, students. Shift from Nehruvianism to neoliberalism, and now shift from non-alignment to multi-alignment. Non-alignment is also seen as a Nehruvian policy, and we have now shifted from it. It represents Nehruvian idealism, which has been criticized by scholar experts like Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar also, era of optimistic non-alignment. So over the years, we have transitioned from this. And Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, was also more pragmatic and realist. And since the end of Cold War, we have transitioned from this. It does not fulfill the purpose. The Nehruvian policy of non-alignment does not serve India's purpose as far as India's purpose in India's interest in world politics is concerned today. So therefore, you can see a shift, and you have to explain that shift. How Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar criticizes the non-alignment policy as era of optimistic non-alignment, in which India suffered because India was not able to safeguard its territories. We lost our territories to both neighbors, Pakistan and China, during that period. Therefore, since then, we got a reality check, and there has been a shift towards realism as far as Indian foreign policy is concerned, which was initiated by Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi itself, and then later also implemented by subsequent regimes as well. And now, especially in the post-Cold War era, we have shifted towards multi-alignment, a policy of multi-alignment instead of non-alignment. Relevance of non-alignment is decreasing. It is not being seen as a relevant policy anymore. What are the reasons for this shift? You must also mention in your answer. First of all, end of Cold War. End of Cold War has led to declining relevance of non-alignment policy. Also, the emergence of multipolar world. In a multipolar world, it is in India's interest to develop a relationship with all the emerging power centers of the world. That is the policy of a multi-alignment. It would best secure India's interests. Then also the economic development concerns of India. India would want to develop. India has concerns regarding its own economic development, which would also be best secured if we follow multi-alignment. We have to engage with the West also, with the developed states of the world as well, in order to ensure India's progress and development. We cannot stay isolated anymore. Also, geopolitical compulsions are there. Why geopolitical compulsions? Because of globalization. The world order now has changed. Today, we live in a cobweb world. Today, we live in a world of complex interdependence, a world of economic interdependence. Therefore, you cannot remain isolated anymore. India has to engage with all power centers of the world, which is also leading India to multi-alignment. Rise of China is a worry for India. To counter that also, we have to align with the Western world. Whereas when we were non-aligned, we were more favorable towards Soviet Union. Also, security concerns, of course, are there. And in order to safeguard India's security, also multi-alignment policy is better for us. Also, this will help us safeguard our strategic autonomy also. You must discuss this as well. The principle of strategic autonomy. You must also quote how India is an aspirational power now. India wants to engage with neighbors. India wants to engage with regional powers, also with global powers. And multi-alignment policy helps us in doing that. Quote experts we discuss in the classes. Ian Hall. Ian Hall says India is doing normative hedging by following policy of multi-alignment. Quote Suhasini Heather, which we discuss in the classes. Suhasini Heather also says India is doing strategic hedging. Discuss the concept of strategic hedging, which we are trying to implement through multi-alignment. Quote Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar. He has also said that India has today have multiple engagements. India will have multiple engagements in the future. Discuss this as well. So conclude with the viewpoint of these experts. Bring in concepts also, how multi-alignment will enable us to do strategic hedging, normative hedging, multiple engagements. Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar also favor this. Even Mr. Narayanan, our former national security advisor, has favored this policy. He says non-alignment policy has outlived its utility. And this new change in our policy is a step in the right direction. He also supports multi-alignment policy. He said this is what was initiated by Vajpayee, continued by Dr. Manmohan Singh, and even Prime Minister Modi continues to follow the same. You also must describe in the body of the answer, I forgot to mention, our multi-alignment stand. We are in part of all the camps. We are part of US-led initiatives, Quad, IPF, PGI, but also we are a part of the China-led initiatives, SCO, BRICS, NDB, AIIB. So you see, we are engaging in both the camps. And you also must mention all this in the body of the answer. That's multi-alignment policy of India. And then in the concluding paragraph, you must also mention that we are now seeing emergence of new Cold War. And this new Cold War is going to be challenging for India. In coming times are going to be very challenging for India as far as our foreign policy is concerned. Because one of the new Cold War participants this time, one of the powers, China, is our hostile neighbor. We have territorial dispute with them. So how are we going to maintain a multi-alignment stand in the context of emergence of new Cold War is going to be challenging for India. That also you must mention the challenge in your concluding paragraph. So this is what we discuss in a lot of detail in the classes, and you must mention and give all examples how we are part of Quad, we are part of Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, SCRI Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, also IPF Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, but at the same time part of China-led and Russia-led initiatives also, SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, also part of BRICS, also part of NDB, also part of AIIB, Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank. All these details, students, we have done in the classes. So this shift which has happened from non-alignment to multi-alignment, you have to explain that shift. From optimism and idealism of Nehru, a more realistic turn Indian foreign policy has taken. The debate between idealism and realism, bring in that debate with Nehru and Patel in Indian foreign policy. Bring in that theory in your answers. So that is how you can attempt all these questions. This is how, students, you can attempt all the questions which were asked in section B of the paper. So students, now we shall also discuss questions which were asked in section A of the paper. So easily you could attempt section B. Now let's start discussing the questions which were asked in section A of PSIR paper 2. Here also students' questions were on expected lines, quite straightforward questions which we must discuss. In fact, in this entire section A, there was only one question, students. Only one question which I would say was a difficult question. I would say was unpredictable. I would say was not directly from the syllabus. And I would say students must have found it challenging. Only one question for 10 marks, 150 words out of the entire section A. Section B was totally from our class notes and class discussions, very predictable. Section A also done totally in our classes, but only one question. And every year, students, it's not surprising for me. Every year in the paper, there are one or two questions which are unexpected. And students are able to manage that because you also get a choice. But this time it was a short note, so it's compulsory. So one or two questions are there which are unexpected, are there which may be difficult, which may not be directly related to what we have studied in the syllabus. Such couple of questions, every one or two questions are there. And this time also there was one question. And this is this first question. Discuss the interpretive approach to study of comparative politics. So this is something which is not apparently mentioned in the syllabus. Not that it's not directly there in the syllabus, and therefore also, one would not pay a lot of attention to this. But if you remember, students, we had done this in the classes. How? If you remember, when I taught you theories of IR, at that time I told you the three types of theories: descriptive theories, interpretive theories, normative theories. I told you there are three functions which all theories perform: a descriptive function, an interpretive function, and a normative function. So on that lines, this question has been asked: interpretive approach to study of comparative politics. Students, what is the interpretive approach and what you should write in this particular question? First of all, interpretive approach is a modern approach. Comparative politics, there's a difference between traditional comparative politics and modern comparative politics. Modern comparative politics, which has emerged after the Second World War. And we've done all methods of the modern comparative politics. political modernization approach, political development approach, political culture approach, political sociology approach, political economy approach, David Easton's political system approach, Gabriel Alman's structural functional approach. All these approaches we have done also in the classes. So this is also, interpretive approach is also a modern method. It's a modern method. It uses qualitative techniques, qualitative methods, not quantitative. And the purpose of the interpretive approach is to uncover the meanings of individual or group actions through interpretation of their beliefs and discourses. That is what interpretive approach is there. Therefore, this is very similar to, students, if you remember, structuralism, post-structuralism, and postmodernism, and also constructivism. These are all critical approaches which we have done in our classes. Modern approaches, post-structuralism, postmodernism, constructivist approaches. The interpretive approach is very similar to that, because the purpose of the interpretive approach is to uncover the meanings of individual actions and group actions through the interpretation of their beliefs and discourses. And if you remember, post-structuralism, postmodernism, Michael Foucault, Derrida, these scholars, they argue that knowledge is power. The power meanings are hidden in the discourse. Power meanings are hidden in the knowledge structure itself, which should be uncovered. So that is what we do in the interpretive approach to study of comparative politics also. We try and interpret group and individual actions by interpreting their beliefs which people have and discourses which are there in the society. So these approaches which we have discussed in our classes, structuralism, postmodernism, constructivism, this is what these are the approaches which would help you attempt this particular question. Because this interpretive approach focuses on uncovering the meanings behind individual and group actions by focusing on the interpretation of the discourse and beliefs which people follow. And that's exactly what postmodernism also says and post-structuralism also says. And also, it is very similar to what we have discussed already, that the traditional approaches were not sufficient to deal with the to analyze political system of post-colonial states. There's a difference of text and context. If you do only comparative government study of constitutions and institutions, that will not be sufficient to understand the political system of post-colonial states. You will have to understand the norms, the belief systems which are there among the people of post-colonial states, the role of caste in politics, the role of religion in politics, the role of cultural, social factors in politics, political culture approach, political sociology approach. That is important to understand all of this in order to understand political system of these countries, post-colonial states, which is also required while doing comparative politics. So that is how, students, you can attempt this particular question. So as I told you, this was the only question which I would say was a little difficult. And for this, students were required to apply mind and also infer details on the basis of what we have done in the classes and attempt the question accordingly. So it was a more application oriented question. Certainly, one can say not on predictable lines. So one question, of course, in the whole paper, I've identified only one question, which I would say was a difficult question. Out of the 28 questions, 27 questions straightforward. All you had to do was vomiting of the notes and nothing else. Only one question, student, was I would say good question, qualitative question, and of course required certain in-depth understanding and conceptual understanding to tackle this question, as I discussed with you. The next question, students, now the easy part starts again. Explain central tenets of world system theory. 10 marks. Such a easy, I described such questions as halwa questions. These are halwa questions. What is this question? Such an easy question. World system theory given by Immanuel Wallerstein. Dependency school of thought. In the introductory paragraph itself mentioned dependency theory given by Andre Gundo Frank, Samuel Rolf Prebisch, Samir Amin, and Immanuel Wallerstein. It's a Marxist approach. And out of these dependencies, mentioned in the introductory paragraph, what is the dependency theory? It criticizes economic interdependence model given by liberals. It criticizes the exploitative trend of globalization. And one of the most prominent dependency theorists and Marxist theorists in IR is Immanuel Wallerstein. He is given the world system theory, core, periphery, semi-periphery model he is given, where he criticizes the exploitative content of globalization, exploitative nature of globalization, which is facilitating drain of wealth from periphery to core. You must mention that. You must also mention the role played by semi-peripheries. According to Emmanuel Wallerstein, semi-periphery states, they are the ones which are showcases of globalization. They are the ones which are helping us sustain globalization. They are the ones which have become shock absorbers. Then you also must mention the world system theory says, Wallerstein's world system theory, that the world system is a historically bounded system. It has been going through stages. There was a feudal order, then a capitalist order. In the future, there will be a socialist order also. In fact, he criticizes Francis Fukuyama and says that this is not end of history. It is the beginning of the end phase of capitalism, which he compares with barbarianism. An alternative to barbarianism is socialism, according to Emmanuel Wallerstein. So this is the world system theories. Man, give examples. Which are semi-periphery economies? China, India, BRICS economies. And concluding paragraphs, you mentioned semi-peripheries are now becoming exploiters of periphery. China is a primary example. So that is what you will have to do. But also, in your concluding paragraph, you may even give criticisms as well. This also suffers from economic reductionism, the world system theory. And you must mention that one sentence in your concluding paragraph also, highlighting the limitations of the approach as well. And also highlight its relevance. Do both in your concluding paragraph. How relevance? Present day world politics can be best understood with this core periphery model. The role of semi-peripheries in sustaining globalization and defending globalization is very apparent. How core is now running away from globalization, but semi-peripheries are sustaining it because they are the biggest beneficiaries of globalization, showcases of globalization. So you must mention that. Again, a straightforward question. Then the next question, the expansionist tendencies of the current Russian regime indicate its intentions for the realization of a greater Russia on the lines of the Soviet era. Comment on this. And we did this in the class. If you may remember our discussion on Russia-Ukraine crisis and emergence of new Cold War, in these lectures we discussed how Vladimir Putin wants to restore the old glory of Russia. Old glory of Russia, which Russia used to enjoy during Soviet times. And that has been one of the aspirations of Vladimir Putin, which explains Russia's expansionist tendencies, which explains Russia's war in Ukraine. And this is what we discussed in the class also. How you should mention this, how, in the 2008 itself, in the Munich conference, Vladimir Putin had raised questions against eastward expansion of NATO. He had raised questions. He's the one who said that anyone who would not feel bad because of disintegration of Soviet Union does not have a heart. And anyone who would want to revive it does not have a mind. So he's very pragmatic also. He wants to restore the old glory, but he knows that the old map of Soviet Union, that is reviving that would also not be possible. But the kind of influence which Russia used to enjoy, which Moscow used to enjoy during Soviet era, he wants that influence back. Especially in East Europe, especially in countries which are in the periphery of Russia, countries like Ukraine. So this has been affecting, of course, this is affecting the Russian expansionist tendencies right now. Constructivism says your perception shape your reality. Reality does not shape perception. So Russian perception, the perception of Russian leaders like Vladimir Putin is driven by their nostalgia with the old Soviet era, the Russian influence which there was in the old Soviet era. You also must mention the balance of power theory. How Ukraine's tilt toward West, Ukraine's decision to join NATO disturbed balance of power in East Europe. And that is one of the reasons why Russia attacked Ukraine also. You also must mention, students, how Russian foreign policy has always been led by search for warm water seaports, geopolitical determinants of Russian foreign policy. And that is why Russia is interested in the Ukrainian territory, which would give them complete control over the Crimean Peninsula and Black Sea. Eastward expansion of NATO again represents a security dilemma for Russia. Eastward expansion of NATO disturbs balance of power and creates security dilemma for Russia. Use concepts of realism and constructivism to answer this question, students. Geopolitics to answer this question, students. We had done this in the new Cold War class. We had done this in the Russia-Ukraine class. And you must use all those points to answer these questions. So that's the requirement of the question. You have to explain how the expansionist, Russia, of course, is an expansionist country. That's what it is doing in Ukraine. How these tendencies indicate the realization, their intentions for a realization of greater Russia on the lines of Soviet era. During the Soviet Union, Moscow was so influential, they want that influence back. And Vladimir Putin is responsible for resurgence of Russia, you must mention. So that is how you can attempt this question as well, students. The next question, option D, explain the various facets of the idealist approach to study of international relations. Comment on its contemporary relevance. This question also discussed in classes, given to you in the test series also, discussed in the classes as well. Same question has been repeated in the exam. And this, so many times we discuss this. What are fairy? And this is a PYQ, I'm telling you. It's a previous year question. It has already been asked in the paper, in the previous papers. Only the language has changed. Same question has been repeated. The world system theory question is also a PYQ. It has been asked many times. So this question again, what does it say? Explain various facets of the idealist approach. What are the main features of the idealist approach you have to mention? And also comment on its contemporary relevance. In the introductory paragraph, hit the nail on the head. Liberals were described as idealists or utopians by the early realist scholar E.H. Carr in his book 20-Year Crisis. In the introductory paragraph, hit the nail on the head. Tell the examiner who are idealists. What is idealist approach? These are liberals. Liberal theory, which was the first school of thought in IR. And liberals were described as idealists, were termed as idealists by realist scholars like E.H. Carr for overlooking the realities of power politics and international politics, for ignoring power realities, which became one of the reasons for the failure of League of Nations and outbreak of Second World War. Therefore, E.H. Carr described, liberals like Woodrow Wilson as utopians and idealists. So that liberal approach in IR is described as idealist approach given by Woodrow Wilson. So you mentioned that in the introductory paragraph itself. And the body of the answer talked about its features. What are its features? What are the main assumptions which you can find in the 14-point speech of Woodrow Wilson also? It says states should have free trade. It will create economic interdependence and therefore peace and stability. Economic interdependence, liberalism, given by Richard Rose Crane. It also talks about freedom of navigation. It also talks about more people-to-people contacts, which will lead to development of security, community, and peaceful relations. Karl Dutch communication theory, sociological liberalism, given by James Rosenau, John Burton. All this you must mention. The Cobb-Webb model, which has resulted because of that. Then complex interdependence model given by Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye also. Also, the liberals, the idealists, they gave this theory of republicanism, motivated by Immanuel Kant, that there are more democratic nations in the world will become more peaceful, so they promote democracy, which is again based on the idea given by Michael Doyle, democratic peace thesis. Liberal institutionalism, which was given by Woodrow Wilson himself, that there should be liberal institutions in the world which would help states cooperate with each other and ensure peace and stability and prosperity in world politics. The idea of liberal institutionalism, United Nations is a primary example for that. IMF and World Bank is a primary example for that. So these are main features of idealism. More trade without barriers, freedom of navigation, promotion of democracy, role of liberal institutions in the world, having more faith in cooperation instead of conflict. The idealists, they believe that states, they are based on absolute gains, not on relative gains. They disagree with the realist theory of relative gains, and they have hope that states can cooperate. Conflicts can be resolved with the help of cooperation. States can cooperate. They are not motivated by Hobbes. Realists are motivated by Hobbes, whereas liberals are motivated by John Locke. The idealists have hope in cooperation, that with the help of cooperation, states can resolve their conflicts and disputes. So this foundational differences which are there between liberalism, idealism, and realism, you must mention in your answers. Also, the idealists, they do take into consideration the role of non-state actors also, which the realists, they reject. They are Lockean in their point of view, whereas realists are Hobbesian in their point of view. The idealists are hopeful for cooperation between states, whereas the realists are not. So all these basic features of liberalism, basic tenets of liberalism, idealism, you must mention respect for human rights also in your answers. Then in the concluding paragraph, you must highlight its relevance. What is its contemporary relevance? Comment on its contemporary relevance. Liberal international economic order is in a state of crisis. All liberal institutions today are like IMF, World Bank, WTO, UN. They suffer from democratic deficit, trust deficit, credibility crisis, legitimacy crisis. UN has been failing in implementing collective security. UN's failure in Ukraine, UN's failure in Gaza. Security Council has been paralyzed because of misuse of veto power. Therefore, Joseph Stiglitz have suggested that if you want to sustain the liberal world order, then urgently reforms are required. These liberal institutions should be reformed. They should become democratic in true sense. They should follow liberal values in true sense. The democratic and trust deficit in these liberal institutions should be corrected to restore the relevance of a liberal world order. Also, American hegemony is on the decline. Hegemonic stability theory given by Robert Gilpin and Charles Kindleberger says that you need a benign hegemon to sustain a liberal world order. Because American hegemony is on decline, so liberal world order is in a state of crisis. Deglobalization is taking place. So you must mention this in your concluding paragraph while talking about the relevance. Relevance means you have to highlight whether it is still relevant or not. And if it's losing relevance, why? And what should be done to restore relevance? So that is what you have to do in your concluding paragraphs here. So this is how you can attempt this question. Many times we've done this in our classes and you would be easily able to do this. Then also the next question is, the changing global order and ongoing regional conflicts with the global powers taking sides have jeopardized the progress made towards disarmament in the past. This is also a question, student, which we have done in the classes number of times while discussing new Cold War, while discussing changing world order. We discussed this, that what is a new trend in world politics? The new trend in world politics, changing global order. Global order is changing. From a unipolar world, it is becoming a multipolar world. It's become, countries like China are now challenging the hegemony of US. American hegemony is on the decline. We discussed this in the classes. And ongoing regional conflicts, Russia-Ukraine war, Israel-Hamas war. With the global powers taking sides, US supporting Israel, China supporting Russia, have jeopardized the progress and that we made towards disarmament in the past. Comment. So how this changing world order, you have to comment on this, how this changing world order, regional conflicts and emerging rivalries between great powers, between global powers, rivalry between US and Russia, rivalry between US and China, is doing a disservice. It is jeopardizing the progress which was made in disarmament. You have to comment on that. And it is a very relevant question. Exactly this is happening. Recently, Russia announced withdrawal from the New START treaty. It was the last nuclear weapons treaty between Russia and US. Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, New START treaty. Russia has suspended the treaty. Before that, Americans had withdrawn from ABM, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. So whatever arms control treaties were there between the Russians and the Americans, prominent ones, they have withdrawn from these treaties. These treaties have been suspended, which is not good for disarmament, which is a challenge for disarmament. Also, because of these regional conflicts, the arms race is on the rise. Arms race is a nuclear arms race may not trigger because Russians have withdrawn from New START. Happened recently, last year only. A new arms race is emerging now. Also, a new Cold War-like situation is emerging, which will also give more fuel to arms race between the Chinese and the Americans, Russians and the Americans. And in fact, what the Russia-Ukraine crisis has again highlighted the role of nuclear weapons in two ways differently, students. Ukraine had given up nuclear weapons in the 90s. It had inherited nuclear weapons of Soviet Union, which it had returned to Russia in the 90s on this commitment that its security would never be threatened. And this commitment, this promise has been violated. If Ukraine had nuclear weapons, it would have enjoyed nuclear deterrence. Russia would have never dared to attack Ukraine. So Ukraine's vulnerability has highlighted the importance of nuclear weapons. This would motivate other countries, aspiring nuclear powers like Iran, to have a nuclear weapons program. Nuclear deterrence has, again, it has been able to prove its relevance. That if Ukraine had nuclear weapons, Russia would have never dared to attack Ukraine, and Ukraine could have safeguarded its security. So this is going to lead to more nuclear proliferation, which is not good for disarmament. Secondly, Russia has been giving nuclear threat to Ukraine during the war. This 2-year war, 2022, the war started. Russia continuously have been giving nuclear threats and have been threatening use of nuclear weapons. So this militarization of world politics, which is now happening, belligerent policies, arms race, nuclear arms reduction treaties, and ABM treaty, START treaty being suspended, all this is doing disservice. It is jeopardizing whatever progress was made for disarmament in the past. FMCT, fissile material cutoff treaty, is not making any progress, you must mention. It has not been signed. CTBT has not been implemented. NPT still has not been signed by nuclear weapon states like India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. Nuclearization of North Korea, Iran's nuclear weapons program, is a threat to global disarmament and non-proliferation. The new Cold War, which is emerging now, a new Cold War expression between rising China and US, that is also going to make the world order more and more unstable, and that would not be good for disarmament. You must mention Thucydides trap, Kindleberger trap, power transition theory given by Kenneth Organsky. There will be more uncertainty. There will be more instability because of a new Cold War-like situation. And now offensive realists like Mearsheimer are now suggesting that nuclear deterrence is the policy which will help America secure its interests in the upcoming new Cold War. So there is a new strength, renewed focus now on development of nuclear weapons and ensuring nuclear deterrence. So of course, disarmament debates are taking a back seat. Of course, it is happening. Even though social constructivists like Nina Tannenwald has argued that a nuclear taboo has emerged, and also Ernest Haas has talked about the role of epistemic communities in delegitimizing nuclear weapons. But despite and on the basis of this, the United Nations adopted a nuclear ban treaty a few years ago, but it has not been signed by any of the nuclear weapon states. So the changing global order, emerging new Cold War, emerging new arms race, how is this going to jeopardize disarmament? That's what you have to write in this short note. It's just for 150 words, 10 marks. You can easily attempt this by using all these points which I've just given to you. And in the concluding paragraph, you must mention India's stand on disarmament. What is India's stand on disarmament? Rajiv Gandhi Action Plan on Disarmament. That should be the way forward. This is what the world should try to achieve. This is what the United Nations should try to achieve. So that is how you can attempt these questions. So all the short notes we have done, which was in section A. Now we must also discuss question number 2. So question number 2, the part A, again, something which was expected, something which we have been discussing in our classes multiple times. Deglobalization is displacing globalization. You have to comment on this statement for 20 marks. So basically, students, in this particular question, in your answer, you have to highlight challenges faced by globalization in contemporary world politics. Challenges which are also argued by global skeptics, globalization skeptics. So that is what you have to highlight here, in which we have done so many times in the classes. So a deglobalization is displacing globalization. First of all, in the introductory paragraph, define what is globalization. Definition of globalization: it's a borderless world. A global village has emerged. Deterritorialization of economic relations have happened. Deterritorialization of power has happened. All the features of globalization which we discussed. A shared social space has emerged in the world. Economic integration of the world economy. Emergence of a single market at the world level. Definitions given by McLuhan, Kenichi Ohome, Gilpin. You must discuss this in your introductory paragraphs. What is globalization? In the body of the answer, try and discuss the trajectory. How globalization became prominent because of Washington Consensus, TINA factor, which was argued by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and how a stable liberal order, existence of a stable liberal order based on globalization was celebrated by Francis Fukuyama after the end of Cold War by giving the end of history thesis. But then, despite existence of a globalized world, despite existence of a cobweb world, the model given by John Burton, a complex interdependence world, there are challenges which are there, which globalization has been facing. Not today, since many years. Since the 90s, even before that, globalization has been facing challenges. Which are those challenges? You must make two subheadings. Challenges from the developing world. Developing world have always questioned the global spread of capitalism, globalization. You must use a Marxist theory to articulate those concerns. The demand for new international economic order. The drain of wealth, which have been happening from periphery to core because of globalization, because of which globalization was delegitimized. Then the next, you must mention the present backlash against globalization is now not coming only from developing countries, but from the developed state. Core states are now have turned against globalization. This is what Joseph Stiglitz also says. And why this has happened? This has happened because of the threat which core states today is facing from semi-periphery economies like China. They've realized that China is the new beneficiary of globalization. China has emerged as the biggest challenger to American hegemony. So the West has now turned against globalization. They've been trying to follow a containment policy against China. They want to decouple their economy from China. They are discouraging their investors to not invest in China. They've imposed also trade barriers on Chinese products, which has triggered a trade war between US and China. A China containment policy launched by Donald Trump is being now followed by the American government. Even Joe Biden has taken that policy forward. Semi-peripheries have become the new showcases of globalization, new beneficiaries of globalization. They are the ones who are benefiting more. China has become the biggest export economy of the world. And now America is turning protectionist because of this. In America, there's an anti-immigrant sentiment. There's a sentiment against China also because they have a huge trade deficit with China. America has also caused the crisis of WTO's dispute settlement mechanism, you must mention here. WTO, which has been a poster child of globalization. And COVID has further accentuated this retreat from globalization. COVID pandemic, which has made countries realize the importance of weaponized interdependence, that how the economic interdependence which they have with China, that can be weaponized also. China can weaponize that idea of weaponized interdependence given by Newman and Farrell, which we discussed in the class. Western countries have realized the vulnerability which they have because they depend on China-based supply chains. And therefore, Professor Nicholas Lamp has now said that resilience have become the new ingredient of globalization. Now they're trying to develop resilient supply chains, diversify supply chains to reduce their economic dependence on China, to reduce dependence on China as far as supply chain networks are concerned. During the pandemic, these supply chains were disrupted, which led to a supply chain shock recession. We discussed this in the class. So globalization is undergoing a change, of course, undergoing a complete overhaul. Resilience has become the new ingredient of globalization. And now semi-periphery economies are taking the lead in globalization. Pax Americana may be replaced by Pax Seneca in coming times, in line with the hegemonic stability theory, in order to sustain liberal world order. However, students, you must mention Kindleberger trap given by Joseph Nye. Kindleberger trap, which says that China may not be prepared to replace American hegemony or to take the role of a hegemon to stabilize liberal world order. This is what has happened in the interwar period also, when Pax Britannica was being replaced by Pax Americana, but America was not prepared to deliver global goods. And this has created the economic chaos of the interwar period. This again may now happen. America is on the retreat. American hegemony is on the decline, but Chinese are still not capable enough to play that role of a benign hegemon to establish a stable liberal world order. First of all, China does not have its own commitment towards liberal values. China does not follow liberal political values in its own domestic politics. China has been pursuing debt trap diplomacy in its foreign policy also. So China has an illiberal image of its image. The world criticizes China for violation of liberal values. So China also has capacity constraints. China is only an export-driven economy. Its economic growth may not be sustainable. It has to become a consumption-driven economy like America. So China may not be ready to shoulder the weight of stabilizing the liberal world order. So this transition from Pax Americana to Pax Seneca may not be stable and smooth. This will create uncertainty in the global economic order. The model of globalization may collapse, which will lead to economic unrest, economic chaos, like we had seen during interwar period, the Great Economic Depression. This is the Kindleberger trap given by Joseph Nye, liberal scholar. He's given this idea based on the hegemonic stability theory, which was given by Charles Kindleberger, which we discuss in our classes. Power transition theory, Kenneth Organski's theory also says that there is going to be uncertainty. So this transition from America taking the lead of globalization towards China taking the lead of future globalization is not going to be smooth. It's not going to be very easy. It is going to be filled with challenges, which we have discussed in our classes. So all this is not good for globalization. A deglobalization, a trend of deglobalization is emerging. Protectionism is on the rise. Especially Western economies are doing that. There's a strong sentiment against immigration in the Western countries. There are protests against immigration in Western countries. You must have seen what happened recently in UK. You may give the example. Trump's isolationist agenda, America First agenda, has also been responsible for this. America, when Trump was president, America had withdrawn from WHO, World Health Organization, also from UNESCO. America is turning more and more unilateral and isolationist. So there is, a major challenge which globalization is today facing. You must use the Marxist point of view in this answer. You must use the Kindleberger trap in this answer to highlight how this transition from Pax Americana to Pax Seneca, as far as future of globalization is concerned, is going to be so difficult. It is going to be so uncertain. So 20-mark question, multiple theories you use to attempt this particular question. And also in the concluding paragraph, you mention the viewpoint of Amartya Sen and Joseph Stiglitz, how to make globalization work. They have suggested that globalization, Amartya Sen has favored globalization. He said the periphery states also should work on their governance and infrastructure to benefit from globalization. And Joseph Stiglitz have suggested that in order to make globalization work, liberal institutions must be overhauled. They should undergo reforms. They should address the democratic deficit and trust deficit problem. So that is how you can conclude by quoting these scholars. Then B, a question on 15 marks. What are the distinctive features of postmodern state in the advanced capitalist economies? Analyze. Students, this is the question which I had given you in the test series. We discussed in the classes. In the test series, the same question I gave. Also gave model answers for this particular question. And you could have easily attempted this question if you were part of the test series or the classroom program. This is exactly what we discussed in our classes. And in the test series also, this question was asked. What are the distinctive features of postmodern state in advanced capitalist economies? So the advanced capitalist state, you have to discuss the features of advanced capitalist state. So what is the role of state in advanced capitalist economies? In this, students, you may quote the debate which is there between Miliband and Polunsas. Miliband-Polunsas debate, both of them are Marxist scholars. And they have given their own viewpoint on the role of state in an advanced capitalist economy. Advanced capitalist state. And both of them have given different viewpoints on that what role state plays. You have the viewpoint of Miliband. Miliband has given his viewpoint in this book, State in Capitalist Society, where he's given an instrumentalist model. Instrumentalist model where he says that there is a unity between class power and state power. State represents the interests of the class, capitalist class. And this is opposed. This is rejected by the other Marxist scholar, Polunsas. He is given an structuralist model of the state. Whereas Miliband has given an instrumentalist model of the state. In the structuralist model of the state, In this book, Pulunsas has given this viewpoint in this book, Political Power and Social Class, where he creates a distinction between capitalist class and state power. He does not believe in the unity of state power and class power. He says that there's a distinction between the two. State enjoys relative autonomy. He talks about relative autonomy of state. State is based on popular legitimacy. State also engages with the masses. And the capitalist class would want to disassociate from the state at times, especially when state uses method of repression. The capitalist class would want to disassociate itself from the tools of repression used by the state. So there is a relative autonomy of the state. He rejects the unity of state power and class power as argued by Miliband in his instrumentalist model. Also, state itself is an arena of class struggle according to the structuralist model. So what role state plays in an advanced capitalist economy, on this Marxist scholars have given viewpoints. And the biggest debate is between the Miliband and Pulunsas, instrumentalists versus the structuralist model of advanced capitalist state. The traditional viewpoint is that state is just representing class power, the interests of the capitalist class. But the Pulunsas disagrees with that. He talks about relative autonomy of state. And this debate we had discussed in the classes, given you notes. This was there in the test series also. You could have easily attempted this question. And and this is a topic, students, which is not just, there are many questions which would not be just related to paper 2 syllabus. There are questions at times which are framed which would require you to use content from both PSIR paper 1 and paper 2. So it is an interdisciplinary question. You have done advanced capitalist state in your paper 1 classes also. So that content also you will use to attempt this particular question. Then the next question, students, such a predictable question. And I would say it's again a PYQ, previous year question. This has been asked earlier also by UPSC a few years ago. They asked this question. So again, a repetition of previous year question. That is why, students, we discuss previous year questions in all our classes. That is the importance of previous year questions. 30 to 40% of the questions, they get repeated every year in the paper. So this is also a PYQ, a previous year question, which says, what were the limitations of NAFTA? How did its replacement by US-Mexico-Canada agreement counter them? Explain. This is a question asked earlier also. When Donald Trump was the president of USA, at that time, Donald Trump articulated America's grievances with the NAFTA agreement, North America Free Trade Agreement, which is mentioned in the syllabus. And because of America's insistence, because of Donald Trump's insistence, this NAFTA agreement was reviewed and a new agreement was signed, US-Mexico-Canada agreement, replacing NAFTA. This is what had happened when Donald Trump was the president. And the question is based on that. What were limitations of NAFTA? Why was America unhappy with NAFTA? First of all, that's the first part of your answer. The second part of your answer is how this agreement will help them address grievances of America as far as NAFTA is concerned. So you'll have to discuss limitations of NAFTA. And you'll have to discuss how this US-Mexico-Canada agreement will address those limitations which America had articulated, which according to America, was not in line with American interests. So what were limitations of NAFTA? One limitation, this is what Kaplan has also argued, that as far as America is concerned, America was ignoring the threat to its own hegemony, its own backyard. Because from Mexico, NAFTA was a free trade agreement between Canada, US, and Mexico. So Mexico had become a big, source of American products coming into Chinese products coming into American markets. America suffers a big trade deficit with China. And triangulation of trade was happening. Chinese products were being sent to Mexico. And from Mexico, these products were entering American markets. Backdoor entry of Chinese products into American markets were happening because of NAFTA, which was further, enlarging the trade deficit which America had with the Chinese. Therefore, the threat to American hegemony was there in its own backyard, in Mexico itself, and this was there because of NAFTA. Mexico had become an origin for Chinese products entering American markets because Mexico and US had this free trade agreement. So Chinese products were able to enter American markets through Mexico without any tariffs. which was a big challenge to American industries and American manufacturers. So America's own hegemony was being challenged through Mexico. China was doing it because of NAFTA. Then also one more reason why America had signed NAFTA was in order to deal with illegal migration, which had been happening from the Mexico side. That also was not addressed because of NAFTA. America had assumed that NAFTA will ensure prosperity of Mexico and people from Mexico would stop migrating to US. That also did not happen. Then also, a lot of American manufacturers had shifted to Mexico, were manufacturing in Mexico also, which was also led to loss of jobs in US. And in fact, in Mexico also, there were parts of Mexico which benefited from NAFTA, parts of Mexico which suffered also. The agriculture belt suffered as well. Canada had no grievances. They had been, Canada's dairy sector was not liberalized in NAFTA. Canada was benefiting from that. So therefore, NAFTA had limitations from America's point of view. It was not fulfilling American interests. The illegal migration issue was not also resolved. NAFTA was not helping that issue. Chinese were also, most importantly, Chinese were getting an opportunity. Chinese were exploiting NAFTA. They were using Mexican territory to fuel their Chinese products into American markets through Mexico. A lot of products were assembled in Mexico, but the supply chains were based in China. Parts coming from China were assembled in Mexico, and the products were assembled in Mexico and then shipped into American markets, and making use of benefiting from the free trade agreement which was there between Mexico and US. Therefore, Americans, they were against NAFTA and they wanted review of NAFTA, which happened when Trump was the president. NAFTA was reviewed and a new agreement, US-Mexico-Canada agreement, was signed, which in a way has helped America to secure its interests. How? First of all, there are now limitations on Mexico and Canada, that only those products would be able to enjoy barrier-free trade, the ones which are majorly manufactured in these countries, and minimum use of Chinese parts is there. There's minimum use of China's products in order to counter China. And there are now such guidelines and such measures in USMCA agreement which would help America counter China's influence in its own backyard. Also, USMCA says that wages in Mexico will be increased, so that if people would get better wages in Mexico, they will stop illegally migrating to US. There's a sunset clause also in USMCA agreement now. And most importantly, there are clauses regarding the automobile industry, which have majorly shifted to Mexico, and how only those automobile products would be able to enjoy barrier-free trade, would be able to enter American markets, which have been majorly manufactured in Mexico, with minimum use of China's parts and China's products. So that is how the USMCA agreement has been negotiated. We discussed this in the class. A lot of detail. You must mention all those details in your answers. And also, the Canadians have been forced to also liberalize the dairy industry also now. So this is what has happened. So that's how America, this is part of this. Basically, you have to mention this in this theme in your answer, that this shift from NAFTA to UMCA again is driven by America's China containment policy. China containment policy. America wants to, shield its economy from China's cheap manufactured products, which have been entering American economy, which have been getting a backdoor entry into American economy through Mexico because of NAFTA. And also to address the problems of illegal migration. And this was based on Trump's America First agenda. You must mention that also. This also represents backlash against globalization, because now new restrictions have been imposed in USMCA as far as free trade is concerned in North America. Conditions have been imposed. Products have to be majorly manufactured in Mexico and Canada to enjoy free trade with US. There should be minimal use of Chinese products. So it again represents the US-China trade war also. But illegal migration still continues even today, even despite the construction of the Iron Wall, which Trump had constructed. So those problems still do persist. So it's not that it has completely resolved the crisis for America, but certainly it has helped them address their concerns. This again is an indication of a protectionist US. So this is something which you have to address in this particular question. We had done this in classes, And in fact, all the points of USMCA which we had discussed in classes, I do not remember all of them at the back of my hand right now, but I'm sure you remember we did this in the classes. Notes were given to you on USMCA, US-Mexico-Canada agreement, and all those new clauses which have been added in the agreement, the new measures which have been adopted to counter the China's threat to American hegemony, and also other concerns of US, you must mention in this answer. And this is a repetition, again, a previous year question. Also, next, students, question number 3, the first part, discuss the major, this is a 20-mark question, discuss the major recent social movements related to the physical rights of women in various countries of the world. I would say, students, it is a very good question. Very good question. And this question is also based on recent trends. You know how our country, our nation has been rattled by the unfortunate and barbaric incident of sexual harassment which happened in Calcutta recently, which has again triggered the debate as far as protection against sexual harassment at workplace is concerned. So this has been in the imagination of Indians. This issue has been a burning issue in India. Supreme Court has taken cognizance of this particular issue also. So this was there in the newspapers, and this was a burning issue related to that. I would not say this question is based on that. But you know, UPSC, what do they do, examiners? They identify the trend. What is happening, the trend. On the basis of the trend, they frame a question. So this has been one of the important issues, security of women, physical rights of the women. And this, on the basis of that, they framed a question that describe major social movements which are related to physical rights of women in various countries of the world. So how will you attempt this particular question, students? In this question, you have to mention 2 things. First of all, you must know that you cannot attempt this question without mentioning feminism. Feminism theory, which we have done in paper 1 and paper 2 both. You have to start with feminism in your introductory paragraph. The fight against patriarchal mindset of the society, the gendered world, which has caused dangers and challenges for women in all over the world. So you must mention that. Feminist scholars also. And also the difference between old social movements and new social movements. Also the purpose which these social movements fulfill. Resource mobilization, a very important function they perform. And the new social movements, modern social movements, are very different from old social movements. Old social movements were about bread and butter issues. New social movements are about quality of life issues. And these feminist movements for the physical rights of the women, the modern movements, they fall under the category of new social movements, where more creative methods are used, creative approaches are used for protest, for articulating their interests. Use of social media has been happening and has been taking place. So all this you must mention in your, while you write, you must mention this, how there is a difference between old and new social movements. First of all, you describe what is a social movement, difference between old and new, and these movements, they fall under the category of new social movements. And then do start listing, give examples of these new social movements which are related to the physical rights of women. And in fact, there are so many of them which you may quote. Hashtag #MeToo movement, hashtag Time's Up movement, which was launched in US. Then also the Ni Una Menos, hashtag Ni Una Menos movement launched in Argentina. The hashtag Orange the World movement, it's also launched on social media. Also Bring Back Our Girls movement launched in Nigeria. Hashtag Bring Back Our Girls. Hashtag Why I Stayed, related to the domestic violence among married couples. Also the Nirbhaya protest in India, the movement which had happened more than 10 years ago in India against the barbaric rape incident which had happened in Delhi. Also the movements in Western countries which have been launched by women organizations for the abortion rights, physical rights of women, abortion rights. It's her body, let her decide. Abortion rights, this is also a very sensitive issue. For that also social movements have been launched in countries. Movements for abortion rights, maternity leave, the autonomy of the bodily rights which women should enjoy, and how abortion on the basis of consent should be allowed. And this in the Western countries also, this has been very prominent in Western countries like US, in European countries. In India also, we have seen similar movements. So all these examples you can give, multiple examples of women movements. You may also quote an example how, in India, the Supreme Court gave a judgment, Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan, which guaranteed the fundamental right of protection against sexual harassment at workplace. After which the POSH Act has been enacted in India. And how we have seen barbaric events happening in Calcutta recently, in Aruna Shaunbag case in Maharashtra, which led to this movement of there has to be protection against sexual harassment at workplace. And this is now one of the fundamental rights under the purview of Article 21 given by the Supreme Court judgment, Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan. And a law has been made by the Parliament in the year 2013 on this, the POSH Act. So also, so this is how you should, attempt this particular question. Okay, this is how you can attempt this particular question. So you have to relate it with topic of social movements and feminism, and it's a new social movement, of course. So that is how you can attempt this question. Then the next, students critically examine the role of political parties in sustaining and stabilizing democracies in the developing societies. This is also a question from comparative politics, and a good question. You have to critically examine the role played by political parties in sustaining and stabilizing democracies in developing societies. So first of all, role of political parties you have to highlight, and role of political parties in stabilizing democracies in developing societies. So these are the key words in the question. So how can you attempt this particular question? Quite straightforward. In the introductory paragraph, we had similar questions in the test series also. We have discussed this in the class also. So in the introductory paragraph, students, you must first of all highlight and define what are political parties, what role they perform. Political parties, they perform the input function of interest aggregation in a political system. Study of political parties is known as sociology. You must mention this in your introductory paragraph itself. What are political parties? What role they perform? Then in the body of the answer, students, you try and highlight how political parties have been helping in stabilizing democracies in developing countries. Highlight the viewpoint of Zoya Hassan, India's own scholar Zoya Hassan, the political scientist Zoya Hassan. She has said that political parties, they are keystone political institution in a representative regime. A democratic representative regime is not possible without political parties. She says it's a keystone political institution. She also says that Zoya Hassan says that political parties, they perform essential 3 functions in sustaining democracy, which we did in the classes. Then you may also quote Lasky. Lasky also has given this viewpoint. He says that the only alternative to political parties, a party government, he says, only alternative to party government, he says, is dictatorship. Lasky has highlighted the role of political parties. He says a democracy, a representative regime cannot survive without the role of political parties. He says a society without political parties is essentially will be a dictatorship. So he also highlights the role which political parties play. He says mob has no place in a democracy. He says you need organized people to do democratic politics. Role of political parties are set of organized people. He says politics, yes, is all about struggle for power, but it has to be struggle between organized people. So Lasky also highlights the role of political parties. You may even give the viewpoint of Edmund Burke and Otto von Kirchheimer. They've also said political parties are very relevant. In fact, Edmund Burke has given a normative approach where he says ideology is very important in political parties, but Otto von Kirchheimer, a behavioralist scholar, says that they are basically powerhouses. Political parties have become all catch parties. They catch all parties, sorry, and they would want to just occupy the roles of powerful positions at any cost, even at the compromise of their ideology. Also, catch all parties. You may also use the viewpoint of Robert Michel and Maurice Duverger. Robert Michel has given iron law of oligarchy. Maurice Duverger also says that political parties is all about political parties. The intention is all about having occupying power, having more and more power. And then also in the concluding paragraph, you must mention that even though political parties have played a very important role in sustaining democracies, as argued by India's own scholar Zoya Hassan also, even in developing societies as well, but political parties are at times also used to legitimize authoritarian rules. Even dictators, they have tried to sustain and legitimize their rule by creating political parties. Even Hitler had a political party. Mussolini had a political party. Morris Diverger says that political parties even exist in those countries which have pseudo-elections, which are pseudo-democracies. Political parties are created to create legitimacy of these pseudo-democracies, to create legitimacy of an authoritarian rule. Because political party and existence of political party would give certain amount of credibility and legitimacy to a dictator or to somebody who's trying to have an authoritarian rule, a totalitarian rule in a political system. So even dictators have tried to make use of political parties. Morris Diverger says political parties have also been created where there are pseudo elections and pseudo democracies. So that tendency is also there in many developing countries where pseudo elections and pseudo democracy is there. They are not real democracies. There also political parties have been flourishing. Pakistan is a primary example. And Pakistan is a pseudo-democracy and political parties are there, has flourished there. But the real power center is the military, which is unelected. Then also in developing countries, you must mention in your answer, developing societies are prismatic societies. Prismatic societies. Therefore, in the developing societies, political parties also have both features. Bureaucratically, they have modern features, but in their working, they are very traditional also. They are internal democracy is not there. Dynasty rule is there. Financial accountability is not there. They are personality-driven political parties in developing societies. So you have combination of both modern features and traditional features in political parties of developing countries, because developing societies are prismatic societies. You must mention in that also in your answer. So all these points you may mention and attempt this question easily. The next question, students, do you agree with the view that US uses NATO as a traditional tool of strategy to perpetuate its hegemony in the world? Why not, students? Of course. In fact, now they have come up with an idea called NATO Plus also. NATO does exist as a symbol of American hegemony. No doubt about that. US uses NATO as a tool of strategy to perpetuate its hegemony. No doubt about that. And you must mention and highlight this in your answers. No, you first of all write down in the introductory paragraph emergence of NATO. How NATO had emerged during the Cold War period as a military alliance led by USA to counter the Soviet Union, which represented strategic bipolarity of the Cold War period. However, then in the body of the answer, you must mention that even though Cold War has ended, but NATO has continued. And NATO has continued as an expression of American hegemony. And it has not continued normally. In fact, since the end of Cold War, NATO has been expanding eastwards. We have seen eastward expansion of NATO. East European countries, which were earlier either part of Soviet Union or were in Warsaw Pact, have been becoming members of NATO. This eastward expansion of NATO is also an expression of American hegemony. And this is one reason why now it has created a security dilemma problem and a BOP problem in East Europe. The decision to include Ukraine wanted to become a member. This was opposed by Russia. This disturbed the balance of power in East Europe, which has led to Russia-Ukraine crisis. Eastward expansion of NATO, the American policy to sustain its hegemony, has led to this Russia-Ukraine crisis. And after the Russia-Ukraine crisis, in fact, NATO has been strengthened because now more European countries have become insecure. And they see Russia as a big challenge to their security. Therefore, European countries which were earlier neutral now are joining NATO. You may give those examples, also recent examples. And a idea of NATO Plus has also emerged. In fact, new military alliances also America is developing, like AUKUS, Australia, UK, US. However, India is not a member of both of them because India gives importance to strategic autonomy. So that is how this is an American effort to sustain its hegemony. Formation of NATO, NATO Plus, AUKUS, continuation of NATO, eastward expansion of NATO. And America is becoming more and more desperate to do so because American hegemony is on the decline. American hegemony is being challenged by Russia's leader Vladimir Putin and, more importantly, by China. China is the biggest challenger to American hegemony now. Russia is being backed by the Chinese. A new Cold War-like situation is emerging now. And you must explain all of this. Arms race has got triggered again. Arms reduction and disarmament treaties are being suspended. New START treaty, anti-ballistic missile treaty. And a new rivalry is now emerging. And NATO represents America's strength, America's dominance. And America would want to sustain that. So this is America. The center of gravity has also now shifted towards Indo-Pacific. Therefore, AUKUS has also emerged. There were moments in the past where NATO was being questioned. NATO solidarity had weakened. There were disputes and differences between France and US, between Turkey and US. They are still there. But this Russia's attack on Ukraine has strengthened NATO solidarity now. More countries have started joining NATO. Even neutral states of Europe have started joining NATO. So you must discuss this geopolitical tensions which are there in Europe. And NATO, in fact, this Russia-Ukraine war has become more of a proxy war. Russia has been backed by China. Ukraine is being backed by NATO members. Americans have been setting monetary help and weapons to Ukraine to fight against Russians. So this entire discussion on NATO, which we have done in the classes so many times, in our Cold War chapter, and also in a new Cold War chapter, you must discuss that. Also, viewpoint of offensive realist John Mearsheimer. He has suggested America to strengthen military alliances, use balance of power strategy, nuclear deterrence strategy to counter China. And formation of NATO, continuation of NATO and AUKUS is helping USA implement the balance of power strategy. External balancing against China to counter China. It's part of China containment strategy. Again, a geopolitical tussle has emerged. So America would want to sustain its hegemony, and because of which this NATO strategy is being used for that purpose. Of course, you must mention that. But there are also, differences among NATO members also now. Especially leaders like Donald Trump has been forcing other NATO members that you should also contribute more towards NATO budget. It's not only America's responsibility to secure Europe. That has been causing certain degree of tensions as well among NATO members. But now this Russia's attack on Ukraine has strengthened NATO solidarity. And you must also use the views of experts on this, which we discussed in the classes. Of course, you will have to do that. In all your PSIR answers, you'll have to use views of experts and theories and concepts to write academically rich answers. Furthermore, students, the next question, which is again a very qualitative question, 20 marks. And I'm so happy, students, we discussed this in the classes in a lot of detail in our lecture on Marxist theory of IR. We discussed this, and exactly same was asked in the paper. The Gramscian theory of hegemony provides many valuable insights into the nature of global power. You have to comment on that. So what the Gramscian theory of hegemony has motivated Marxist scholars to give an interpretation and narrative of international relations also. How power, global power, nature of global power operates in international politics, that has been explained by the followers of the Gramscian theory, Marxist scholars, neo-Marxist scholars. One of them is Robert Cox. You must quote Robert Cox. He says, first of all, in the introductory paragraph, he will describe Gramscian theory of hegemony, Gramscian idea of hegemony. How hegemony of ideas sustain class power. You must mention that. Capitalist power. And that same idea has been used to also give a narrative in international politics also. Robert Cox has criticized realism. He says realism is a problem-solving approach and sustains inequality, an unequal international system. And Robert Cox says that globalization, free trade, liberalization, they have become hegemonic ideas for the West. By perpetuating these ideas, Western countries have been able to sustain their hegemonic control over the world. They have created consent for globalization and free trade in the world. TINA factor, Washington consensus you will have to mention. TINA factor given by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. There is no other alternative. Role of IMF and World Bank, Washington consensus. How the principle of idea of globalization and free trade have become hegemonic ideas. They have helped the core states, the developed countries, the rich countries to exploit poor countries. And the economic divide between the rich and the poor in the world is it keeps on widening. This has facilitated the drain of wealth from periphery to core. And in that, we will have to take into consideration the role of these ideas, these hegemonic ideas. So Gramscian theory has been used by Robert Cox to give a narrative, a Marxist narrative of international politics. How rich countries have been able to sustain their global power on the basis of these hegemonic ideas. Globalization is nothing but global spread of capitalism. This capitalist greed has now spread all over the world because of globalization. So this globalization idea, free trade idea has become hegemonic ideas. So the role of Washington, the Washington consensus, role of IMF, World Bank, and also TINA factor you must mention here. So this is basically a question on the Marxist approach to study IR, the Gramscian tradition which we did in the classes. And you can easily attempt this. It was straightforward, just from what we did. It was all you have to do here is just vomit out the notes which we had given to you in our lectures. And it's a very good question. Very good question. The first time UPSC has asked a question, students, first time they've asked a question on Gramscian tradition in IR. I've been teaching this to my students since last 10 years. 10 years I've persisted with this idea. I knew one day this question would be asked. So far, majority of the questions were on world system theory, dependency theory. First time they've asked a question on Gramscian theory of hegemony in IR, which we had covered in our classes. And you can easily attempt this particular question on the basis of that. Also, the part B, which is for 15 marks, it says, the return of trade barriers and economic sanctions has diminished the spirit of GATT. GATT was there earlier, General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, which was replaced eventually by WTO. In this context, discuss the factors contributing to the decline of WTO in recent times. Discuss factors contributing to decline of WTO in recent times. Crisis of WTO. Basically, students, this is a question on this theme. Crisis of WTO. Crisis of liberal international economic order. This theme we had discussed in our lectures. So the question has been based on this particular theme, that there have been trade barriers in the world. Trade barriers means rise of protectionism. When you read the question, your mind, like a computer, should always decipher what concepts question is hinting towards. Rise of trade barriers means protectionism. Economic sanctions means protectionism. Economic sanctions also means regional rivalries. This had jeopardized the spirit of GATT. That is, what is spirit of GATT? Spirit of GATT was free trade, trade without barriers in goods and services. Especially in goods, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs was for free trade of goods, not for services. Services agreement has been signed in WTO. And in this context, discuss the factors which are now contributing to the decline of WTO also. So what are the factors? So in the introductory paragraph itself, you will highlight all these keywords which I mentioned here. Crisis of WTO, liberal international economic order, rising protectionism, for backlash against free trade, which eventually had caused crisis for GATT's, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which is free trade agreement in goods, and has also caused crisis for WTO. And in the body of the answer, you will start listing the challenges. Which are the challenges? First challenge we have discussed already in the question paper. Backlash against globalization, deglobalization, core states turning against globalization, trade wars between US and China, China threatening American hegemony, Kindleberger trap. You have to mention all this. This all represents crisis of WTO. You have to use all these concepts. Also, the crisis of the WTO dispute settlement mechanism, which is there again caused by core states like US. North-South divide, already we had discussed in the question paper. There was one more question on this. North-South divide in WTO, the tension between global North and global South, the challenges in agreement on agriculture, agreement on services in WTO, crisis of the dispute settlement mechanism of WTO, We've discussed this in the classes, and that's what you have to mention here. And also India's stand on all this. India represents the global south. Pandemic has further worsened the crisis. Deglobalization is replacing globalization. Economic interdependence may be weaponized. Newman and Farrell's idea. And therefore, resilience has become the new ingredient of globalization, and WTO will also have to adjust to that. And this entire crisis of liberal international economic order, which is taking place, and WTO is at the core of it. WTO's dispute settlement mechanism has been paralyzed. The ultimate umpire which was there for trade disputes have been paralyzed. You have to discuss this in your answers. And this is what we have done in the previous questions also. There have been questions on globalization and WTO in this paper, and we've done in more detail. And all those points you will incorporate here as well. And then what is India's stand? In the concluding paragraph, highlight India's stand. What India's stand is on sanctions, on protectionism, on WTO. That also you must highlight. How India would want to defend WTO. India would want to address the concerns of the global south states in WTO. All of that you must address here. So this is how you can attempt this particular question. Again, a new trend, and you must address this question on the similar lines. Okay. And the last question, students. Do you agree with the view that EU has thus far proved to be the most successful experiment in the regional integration process, account for its successes and also some of its recent challenges that it is faced with? Again, from class discussion, from class notes, this is what we have discussed already in the classes. And always I tell you, students, in the classes, whenever you get a question European Union, you have to use theory of functionalism, given by David Mitrani. So you'll have to use that theory while using this, while writing this answer also. So in this question, what do you have to do? Did you agree with the view EU has proved to be the most successful experiment in regional integration? Yes, of course. It's the gold standard of regional cooperation and regional integration at the global level. And it is the best example of regional cooperation, regional integration. Account for its successes. You'll, in the body of the answer, you'll have to write what examples of its successes and also the challenges which it is facing now. So how will you start? In the introductory paragraph, you will start how European Union has emerged as a successful organization to encourage regional cooperation in Europe, regional integration in Europe, in the same Europe where two world wars were fought, World War I and World War II. It has followed functionalist path towards integration, piece by pieces, compartmentalization of issues, spillover effect has worked in EU, European Union. In the body of the answer, mention how it has evolved piece by pieces. It started from a European coal and steel community, which led to emergence of European economic community, eventually led to emergence of European Union as we know today. What are the successes of EU? What are the successful examples of regional cooperation and integration in EU? They have a common parliament, students. You may be aware. They have a common foreign policy. They even have a common monetary policy. They follow common currency called euro. They have a common central bank called European Central Bank. EU is a free trade area, not just a free trade area, it's a common market. It's a customs union. There's free movement of goods, services, capital, and people in EU. They have a visa liberalization agreement, Schengen agreement, where people would need only one common visa to visit all EU states. Schengen visa. They have a common space research organization, a common parliament also, a common central bank, European Central Bank also, a common court also, European Court of Justice. So the European Union is a great example of regional integration and cooperation. They have common monetary policies, common foreign policy, common space research body, common legislation also, common court as well. It's a common market as well. It represents all liberal principles, respect for democracy, respect for human rights, economic interdependence, free trade. All these liberal principles are followed in EU, you must mention. And also, then you must mention highlight challenges. What are challenges? There are internal and external challenges in EU now. What are internal challenges? Inside the EU also, there are certain states which where we see backlash against globalization. They want to be protectionist, and they are now not happy with the kind of cooperation which they have been doing in Europe, and they want to withdraw from that. One of them was UK. Brexit, which has happened already, is a big challenge to EU solidarity, which again reflects backlash against globalization. Then also there is, they have common monetary policies, but do not have common fiscal policies, which has been which has led to Eurozone crisis in Europe. Then also there is a strong difference as far as the economic strength of the countries is concerned. There's a North versus South debate in EU, a core versus periphery debate in EU. The PIGS economies, the Southern European economies, are not economically as prosperous as North European countries. So this economic disparity which is there, which is creating problems in the Eurozone also. They have common monetary policy, but not a common fiscal policy, which had created the Eurozone crisis. Brexit is a big dent in EU solidarity. External challenges are also there. The security challenges which are emerging. Russia's attack on Ukraine is being seen as a big security threat for European Union. Big security threat for EU. EU countries have imposed sanctions on Russia. They want to deal with this threat. Also, the refugee crisis which have been taking place. Ukrainian refugees coming from Syria, from West Asia, from North Africa. Refugee crisis also have been a big problem for EU countries. So these challenges are also there. But EU, in concluding paragraphs, you must mention EU continues to be the poster child of regional cooperation and integration in the world, despite contemporary challenges. And then you also, in the concluding paragraph, you must mention that EU has been successful not just because of functionalism, but because of neo-functionalism also. Because cooperation without political will is not possible. This is what Ernest Haas had argued. Ernest Haas. And there has been political will. That is why European countries have been able to achieve cooperation and integration. There was no political will on the part of UK anymore. Therefore, UK exited and Brexit happened. So neo-functionalism is also quite relevant to explain what has been happening in EU in recent times. So that is how you can attempt this question. So the students, this ends our discussion on all questions which were asked in the examination yesterday. And I hope this discussion has benefited all of you. And I'm so happy to discuss all of this, because I know our students, my students, would have been so confident attempting this paper. Everything was covered in the classes in lot of detail. Lot of questions were asked in the test series itself. And the same test series questions got repeated in the examination. All details were shared with you in the class notes, and questions have been framed on the basis of those class notes. So I'm sure our students, my students, and they've already got in touch with me since yesterday, and they're so happy that they were able to attempt this paper so easily and with lot of confidence. And I've discussed all these questions with you in as extensively as possible in the given time. Also, the video has got very long, so we had to restrict that also, manage time as well. And I hope you have benefited from this discussion. Also, those students who are aspiring to take up PSIR, and studying with us, preparing PSIR with us in our institute here. So this will help you also to get much needed insight that what kind of questions are asked in the paper and how can we approach these questions. So thank you, students. Thank you so much. It was great interacting with you. Are there any questions, students? Would you like to ask any questions? Aditya, we share the notes in the classroom with our students, which are our classroom students. We share the notes with them. And yes, of course, Harsh, we will do that as well in due course of time. So any more doubts, online students, you have? So thank you, students. Thank you so much for your appreciation. Thank you so much. All the best. God bless you. I'm sure all our students will do very well and make us proud after seeing this paper. I'm sure they must have done very well in this paper. Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you, students. Thank you.